There was a time when you could walk into any lunch counter in America, slide onto a red vinyl stool, and order a hot, open-faced turkey sandwich with real gravy for less than $1. Your waitress knew your name, the coffee never stopped pouring, and the food tasted like somebody in that kitchen actually cared. Those lunch counters fed factory workers on their 30-minute breaks, fed kids after school, fed whole families on Friday nights when nobody felt like cooking. They were everywhere, from the Five and Dime in small-town Tennessee to the chrome-trimmed diners lining Route 66. Then one by one they closed. The recipes went with them, not into cookbooks, into memory. Here are 100 forgotten lunch counter meals from the 1970s that disappeared forever. I mean, look, far be it from me to hate on anyone or where they draw their culture from, but really, vichyssoise? There's probably no better example of a dish that works because of an exciting story behind it. So basically, Louis Diat first came up with this dish when he was experimenting with leek and potato soup and decided to try serving it cold for once. Revolutionary idea, I know, but it was uncommon enough, especially given the fact that this is a French dish. Vichyssoise had pretty much always been one of the most traditional kinds of soups you could get there, but once Diaz adapted it and spread his variant, that's the one that really took off. It was always seen as this super elegant dish that was also giving people a bit of comfort after the likes of World War II, which in itself inspired a lot of use of French culture. Vichyssoise was always associated with fine dining, and that high-scale appeal really helped its status in the long run. It got displayed by prominent chefs and by up-and-coming restaurants alike. See, another benefit of the war here was that people had become extremely used to having soups as a regular part of their diet. During the Depression and the war, that was pretty much how people were existing, and it was a time that people don't really look back on favorably. Which is why the parts that people can remember are things they cherish deeply. The idea of potato soup was extremely popular in the 1930s, and honestly, it only got more and more of a common thing after the war. The general crowd was starting to realize they loved things like soup, and vichyssoise was the fanciest one to try if you were really looking to get into this. It was one of the first times a chilled soup became the norm, but it came right in time too. See, the rise of refrigeration was pretty much in line with the time when vichyssoise was a common thing you'd see in American restaurants. Now, I don't need to tell you that a fridge and chilled soup go together like bread and butter. It was really just good timing, circumstances, and also a pretty reliable recipe for soup that made this dish the decade-long success story that it was. I don't think Louis Diat ever expected his chilled variant to take off this much, but now that it has, vichyssoise is a cherished part of American history. Cheese Tidbits by Sunshine are these small and cheesy crackers which were for like a few cents a piece. If you compared them to a modern-day invention, then they would be a lot like Cheez-Its, and those are the delicious bite-sized squares you always see children fawning over. As a snack, they were easy to appeal to kids with. They had everything you needed going for them after all. Kids enjoyed easy, savory snacks that came with a cheesy kick and a crunchy bite. That really was the formula, and it honestly still is. So you can imagine how well they do with children. They were packed in these portion sizes, which made them perfect for binging. And sometimes, if your kid wanted a lighter snack but still something that they could enjoy at school easily on their own, then this was the perfect thing to give them. Plus, it wasn't just savory. It had some pretty nice sweet notes too, which made it a bit different from the other cheese-based snacks of the time. One thing that helped a lot throughout arguably all of the Dust Bowl was the simple luxury known as cornbread. Cornbread was made entirely out of cornmeal, and that was one of the things that was still abundant throughout America. Here, you can run out of walkers in busy hospitals, but never corn. Funny how that one works, right? Anyway, the Dust Bowl was something that almost entirely hit rural areas throughout the Great Plains. You had places like Kansas, Kentucky, Colorado, Orlando, Texas, and so many more areas hit badly by the horrible circumstances that led to the bowl. How was your average schmuck supposed to stay happy and keep his family fed? Well, cornbread and beans were the peasant folks' answer to nature throwing a temper tantrum. Now, it was obvious that the only way they were going to be helped was if they did it themselves, so lots of people began trying to cultivate crops of corn. Beans, particularly pinto and navy beans, were still relatively affordable, even in the face of the Depression. Seriously, I can't talk about how horrible that entire decade was for America. It was like a series of unfortunate events, each even worse for the economy than the last. People held on to things like cornbread and beans like they were pearls. So, if corn was sitting pretty at number 1 in terms of what was easy to get, what would you say number 2 was? Number 25. Liver and onions. No meal divided a lunch counter faster than this one. You either loved it or you moved 3 stools down to get away from the smell. Thin slices of calf's liver dusted in seasoned flour and fried in butter alongside a pile of yellow onions that went soft and sweet in the pan. A side of mashed potatoes soaked up the juice. By the 1960s, liver and onions was already falling off menus as younger customers flat out refused to touch organ meat. Today, it survives in a handful of old-school diners scattered across the country, but no fast food chain ever considered putting it on the board. The audience was aging out, and the smell was never going to sell at a drive-thru. Number 2. Braunschweiger sandwiches were the dark horse of childhood lunches. Wrapped in wax paper and made with a spreadable meat that looked like wet clay, they were both feared and weirdly respected. Braunschweiger, for those who did not know, was liver sausage, soft, salty, and undeniably pungent. It spread like butter and smelled like your grandpa's hat closet. But it had a following. A small, loyal following. Kids who grew up in German households or with parents who loved real food swore by it. Served on rye bread, with mustard or onions if your parents were brave, it was the kind of lunch that made your classmates take a step back. You did not trade this sandwich. You defended it. You ate it with confidence. Or you tried to. The taste was overwhelming, but it stuck with you, literally and figuratively. No one could ever spell it, but everyone remembered it. It was the kind of lunch that made you grow up a little faster. And maybe, just maybe, miss it a little when it was gone. Forage mushrooms didn't always lining our burgers and topping our pizzas. For a majority of its history, it was really just something people ate when things were super bad. There was nothing to eat and people basically just had to forage for whatever they could. The most popular of this was the button mushroom, but they definitely tried to forage as much as they could. Now, despite this, mushrooms were still considered really low class. People had just begun to associate it with nothing but poverty and hard times. It wasn't until the middle and the later end of the 20th century that mushrooms started to become a classic topping you'd see on not just burgers and pizzas, but steaks, chicken dishes, sandwiches, and all kinds of soups and stews. Basically, it's a mushroom world, and we're just living in it now. A big part of this is how canned mushrooms became so accessible. Another reason is that an interest in European cuisine led to a massive boom in cream of soups and cream of mushroom soups. Share some of your favorite mushrooms with us right now in the comments. Fried green tomato sandwiches were tart, crisp, and practical, born out of the need to use what the frost might ruin. Unripe tomatoes were sliced, dredged in cornmeal, and fried in bacon grease until golden. Layered between bread, they made a meal that traveled well and tasted like summer's last stand. Field hands loved them for the crunch, while homemakers loved that nothing from the garden went to waste. They were bright and sharp, the kind of food that woke your tongue after hours in the heat. Some folks added onions or a slice of cheese, but most ate them plain, still warm and oily in paper wrapping. It was a clever dish, built from what could not wait for tomorrow, carrying that same stubborn spirit that kept rural families going year after year. Cottage cheese and canned peaches became a lunchtime staple for seniors seeking something cool, refreshing, and requiring absolutely no cooking. This combination appeared on countless plates during the 1950s and 1960s when cottage cheese was promoted for its protein content and digestibility. A scoop of creamy cottage cheese surrounded by golden peach halves created a meal that felt lighter than sandwiches but remained filling enough to sustain energy through the afternoon. The sweetness of the syrup-packed peaches balanced the mild tang of the cheese, creating flavors that complemented rather than competed. For seniors living alone, this lunch offered particular advantages, since both components kept well in the refrigerator and required no preparation beyond spooning onto a plate. A small container of cottage cheese and a single can of peaches could provide lunches for several days, stretching grocery budgets admirably. Though rarely seen on modern plates, this pairing once represented sensible, economical eating for one. Spam fritters are also pretty much exactly what you think aren't. They sound like a cutesy dish your wife whips up for you before you come home. But this is actually a wartime dish through and through. Thick slices of canned Spam dipped in batter and then deep fried until they're gloriously golden, pure fish and chip style. The outside is as crunchy and hot as you would expect, and the inside is tender, slightly salty and addictively chewy in the way only Spam can be. The flavor is literally just comfort food. It's slightly smoky, the perfect amount of meaty without being overwhelming, and it balances out with the salty notes. This is a dish that makes no apologies and instead chooses to embrace its greasy nature to give you a taste of nostalgia wherever you are. Spam fritters were something that exploded in popularity during World War II, and meat rationing was still a massive thing. Spam, courtesy of American Lend-Lease supplies, started to become what people were relying on because of how easy it was to work with. It was the working-class answer to the age-old question of, how do we make canned meat something that feels like a proper meal? And Spam fritters stuck around even after the war, too, especially in towns where factory work was a lot more common than any other kind of job. Hey, you might not be fighting a war anymore, but that 9-to-5 is still no joke. Number 20. Underwood deviled ham on rye. Peeling back that red foil tin was the sound of a lunchbox opening from 1922 through about 1968. The tin held a paste of finely ground ham, mustard, vinegar, and spices that the William Underwood Company had been selling out of New England since 1868. You scooped 2 tablespoons onto rye, pressed a second slice on top, and cut diagonally. The tin had a small red devil on the label that had not changed in 50 years. It was the oldest registered trademark on a food product in the country. Mothers packed deviled ham sandwiches in metal pails for steel mill shifts and for school because the paste held up through a 6-hour day in any weather. But the kids called it pink mush by the 70s, and the doctors said the salt was too high. The deviled ham sandwich went to ground, and the small red devil on the tin became the only thing about it most Americans remembered. Number 16. Howard Johnson's fried clam strips. This was the dish the chain built its reputation on, and the dish that disappeared with the chain. The strips were the foot of the hard-shell sea clam, dipped in a thick, crinkly batter and fried to a deep golden brown. Served in a paper-lined basket with hand-cut fries and a small paper cup of tartar sauce, $8.50 for the tender sweet dinner in 1978. Jacques Pepin himself reworked the batter formula in the 60s. Howard Johnson's ran more than 1,000 restaurants at the peak. By the end of the 70s, the chain was bleeding locations. The clam supply tightened, the franchise model broke, and the orange roof started coming down one town at a time. Today, 2 Howard Johnson's locations remain, in Bangor and Lake Placid, and the fried clam strip is functionally extinct everywhere else. By the way, real quick, before we get to the next one, if these dishes are bringing back the kind of meals you grew up eating, the recipe guide linked under this video has the printable cards for the cream gravy, the white sauce for the chipped beef, and the cherry phosphate syrup you used to be able to buy in a brown apothecary bottle. Everything tested in a home kitchen, no special equipment. Link is in the description. Now back to the countdown. Number 15. Chicken patty on a bun. The patty was a perfectly round disc of pressed white meat, breaded and frozen, baked on a sheet pan in batches of 40 for 15 minutes. It went on a soft white bun with a leaf of iceberg lettuce and a single slice of pickle. No mayonnaise, no mustard, no condiment unless you asked. The patty was so round and uniform that you sometimes pulled it out of your bun and held it up like a coin. A kid in Tulsa or Tallahassee or Toledo could walk into any school cafeteria in 1987 and find the same chicken patty on the same bun, because all of them came from 3 commodity processors contracted by the USDA. The breading carried too much sodium under the 2012 standards. A whole grain bun replaced the white bun. The new version sits softer in the bun. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. Coq au vin is another classic French dish that has some pretty exotic little twists and turns. It involves a lot of braising and a lot of chicken, mushrooms, onions, and bacon. Already, we're off to an extremely compatible start. All those things see no shortage of love in America, after all. Funnily enough, as fancy as this sounds, it's actually a complete peasant classic from the French. It was made by lower-class households in France using bare-bones ingredients, and the braising was a way to add to the flavor. It actually got so popular in America thanks to 2 things. One, there was this growing natural interest in foreign cuisines, especially French cooking. This was just universal and was something you could observe in any area of America. 2, it was thanks to the constant efforts of Julia Child making French recipes popular on television, in cookbooks, magazines, and just about wherever else you saw her. So you had a public with a curiosity about French cooking and a French chef that specializes in the cuisine. Truly, where would we go from here? Coq au vin was an obvious choice that was going to touch American soil eventually, and I'm just glad it did it in recent memory. Did you ever wonder where this obsession with French cooking came from? Well, for one reason, we had just dabbled in lots of French dishes before and had some pretty positive experiences. There was a national trust around the cuisine, and most people thought of it as one to really take notes from. 2, there were so many soldiers who were returning to America for the first time from Europe since the war. Naturally, they had been pretty well introduced to French and European cooking by that time and brought back those flavors with them. Julia Child also helped a lot, as I previously mentioned. Her book, literally known as Mastering the Art of French Cooking, was the first starting point for the American public when it came to getting familiar with French cuisine. It was accessible, simple enough, and coq au vin was one of the best recipes to try from it. Julia also demonstrated how to make a coq au vin on the French chef, and she spent a lot of her career making these recipes a lot easier to access and learn for people. It was thanks to that people felt confident enough to try it in their homes. Think of it like a very prototype version of wanting to cook something and watching the recipe on YouTube. Typically, French people would use decently sized adult roosters for the coq au vin, which is why it ever needed to be braised in the first place. In America, they use more tender chickens, but the braising is still a key aspect. It was considered a high-quality fine dining meal that came at a price, but was worth the experience. Plus, it also became a bit of a point of competition. Lots of chefs would compete over who could do it better, and that was just good for business. Banana flips were these extremely popular snack cakes that came as a result of Nichols Bakery doing some product innovation, and they completely outsold the competition. Think of the softest banana-flavored cake you have, and think about it being filed with the creamiest, richest filling you've ever conceived in your head. These banana flips were more than a treat. They were an experience, a delightful break in a school day, and a reliable classic to come back to. Parents felt like they were giving their kids something substantial, while kids felt like they had the best dessert in their hands without it even being dessert. There was While I know for a fact you've definitely had some unappetizing meals, let's talk about some good rub. Sweet potato and corn chowder was one of the best things you could get for yourself. See, again, this was a lot like chili beans and crushed crackers. It was sustenance, it was filling, it was a friend to fall back on during hard times, but it was warm. No, I don't mean that it had a decently high temperature. I mean the kind of warmth you feel after having a good hangout with your friends, or a really good meal your mother cooked. Emotional comfort, joy, all that good stuff. Sweet potato and corn chowder was a soup that felt like a soup, and it was also something that really made you healthy as you regularly ate more of it. Plus, people began to grow sentimental attachments to their crops. You have to understand that these were not people who had been raised in the way of farming. Their hands had no calluses, and their eyes couldn't tell how deep you needed to plant a crop. They had a lot of trial and error before they could reliably start growing things like sweet potatoes and corn, and once they did, it tasted even better because they knew it was a result of their hard work. Number 21. Hot brown sandwich. The Brown Hotel in Louisville, Kentucky invented this in 1926, and within a decade, it had migrated to lunch counters across the Upper South. Open-faced turkey on white toast, covered in a rich Mornay sauce made from Parmesan and cream, topped with crispy bacon and a broiled tomato slice. The whole thing went under a salamander broiler until the cheese bubbled brown on top. It was messy, heavy, and required a knife and fork. That last part is what killed it. Fast food needed meals you could eat in a car. The hot brown needed a real plate and someone willing to wash it afterward. A few Louisville restaurants still serve it. Everywhere else, it is a ghost. SpaghettiOs in a thermos were never hot. That was the unspoken truth everyone knew, but no one dared admit. They started hot, sure, bubbling on the stove in that cheerful red can. But by lunchtime, they were lukewarm at best, trapped in a metal container that always smelled slightly like old soup. And yet, those lukewarm pasta rings were magic. A swirling alphabet of childhood comfort, swirling in that iconic orange-red sauce. It was not Italian food, it was not even pasta, really. It was SpaghettiOs, and that was enough. Kids would open their thermos with a dramatic twist, steam barely rising, and proudly take a spoonful like it was gourmet. Because it was not just about taste, it was about ritual, about having something warm in a sea of cold sandwiches, about having a lunch that made you feel like home followed you to school. You knew you would burn your tongue on the first bite and still go in anyway. It was worth it. Even when the sauce stained your shirt or your spoon got lost at the bottom of the thermos, you would do it again and again. Cabbage and bacon fry up was something people adored for its simplicity and its affordability. It was a hearty meal you would frequently see on dinner tables throughout the 1960s if you weren't already tired of seeing it everywhere in cookbooks. It was very common to see this in Appalachia and the South, because cabbage was especially cheap there. Bacon was something the entire nation had a deep-found appreciation for, but the South was always one step ahead in all things savory. The dish was supposed to be a main course meal with a side. This would usually be cornbread or potatoes, but if you were working with lower quantities, then this dish could also do great as a side dish. Cabbage was one of the most affordable vegetables on the entire market, and it was not seasonal. Back then, refrigeration had not become a countrywide phenomena that everyone could rely on 24/7 like we do. We have our fridges on all the time, you know? And cabbage was one of those kinds of vegetables that could last for weeks and weeks without any kind of refrigeration. It was really quick and easy, it was flexible, and you could even try all kinds of different spices and toppings like ranch dressing to make it even better. Apple stack cake slices were the mountain answer to store-bought sweets, and they lasted long enough to pack for lunch. Layers of molasses cake were stacked with cooked-down dried apples that had been mashed into a thick jam. You wrapped it tight in wax paper, and by noon the cake had softened and the apple filling had settled deep into every layer. These slices were never fancy, but they were the closest thing to dessert most folks saw during a workday. They carried the taste of fall orchards and wood stoves even when eaten under the summer sun. If you were lucky enough to get one in your pail, It was probably made by a grandmother who measured sweetness by memory, not spoons. The sugar was scarce, the flour stretched thin, but the effort behind it was rich. It was a small comfort after long hours in the field or at the mill, reminding everyone that even in lean times, there was room for something kind and homemade. Ham and pineapple sandwiches captured the spirit of the tiki craze that swept across America during the 1950s, blending sweet and savory flavors in a way that felt exotic yet accessible. Thin slices of ham were layered with rings of pineapple, often canned, and placed between bread or rolls with mayonnaise. The result was tangy, salty, and slightly sweet, a taste that stood out from the usual sandwiches of the time. Families were fascinated by the idea of tropical flavor, and pineapple became a star ingredient in many mid-century kitchens. The ham and pineapple sandwich reflected this trend, offering a quick way to enjoy something that felt adventurous without costing much. It was common at luncheons, church gatherings, and even in school lunchboxes. Canned pineapple made it affordable and easy to prepare year-round. The combination's popularity endured well past the decade, becoming a hallmark of mid-century curiosity about global flavors. For many, biting into this sandwich was a reminder that even simple lunches could feel like a vacation. Potted meat and crackers provided quick, shelf-stable lunch protein for seniors who needed no-fuss meals ready in moments. Those small cans of spreadable meat paste, often pork or chicken-based, cost mere pennies and required no refrigeration until opened. The meat spread easily on saltines, rye crisps, or Melba toast, creating bite-sized portions that could be eaten while reading or listening to the radio. For seniors living alone, this lunch represented pure convenience since crackers stayed fresh in sleeves and meat cans stacked neatly in pantries. The flavor was salty and intensely meaty, a little going far when spread thinly across crackers. Some added pickle slices or mustard to brighten the richness, though many ate the combination plain. The protein helped maintain energy through afternoon hours when larger meals felt burdensome. This wasn't glamorous eating, but it was practical sustenance, acknowledging the reality of cooking for one. Though still sold in stores, potted meat has disappeared from respectable lunch fare. Beef dripping toast is pretty much entirely nostalgic comfort food. Let me run you by a typical dripping-based toast. You take some thick slices of crusty bread, which ideally should be warm or toasted but will work with whatever the day gives us. You slather on some beef drippings and some salt, pepper, malt vinegar, and whatever else you really like on your toast, and you're good to go. Beef drippings are just the rendered fat from roasts, and most of the time they still have the little browned jelly bits mixed in with the toast. As far as flavors go, you want to imagine a deep umami with a real buttery richness. Something that hits like a cozy blanket on a cold day. It's almost as if toast and your regular 20th century Sunday roast had an incredibly greasy baby meant for breakfasts. Beef dripping toast wasn't just popular in America with the working class. It was the same deal in Britain, and it was served for, honestly, any meal of the day. Dirty cheap, really filling, and something that takes about 15 minutes to prepare? Yeah, nobody was going to be letting go of this recipe anytime soon. Number 22. Welsh rarebit on toast. The sauce was the whole sandwich. Sharp cheddar melted with milk, beer, dry mustard, and a few drops of Worcestershire, poured thick over a slab of toasted white loaf and slid under the broiler until the top went gold. You could eat it with a fork. The lunch rail kept a small saucepan of it warm and stirred. A trucker could order Welsh rarebit, eat it like a hot lunch with coffee, and be on the road by 1:15. The sandwich required a real sauce, and the sauce required someone behind the rail who could pay attention. As the counters moved to faster food, Welsh rarebit was the earliest item to vanish from the slate. Nobody was asking for it anyway. Or milk toast was a common meal for many working class and poor Americans. This was doubly true if you were living in the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, like bean sandwiches, this is something that I feel was always just popular, but it was never really massively used like it was in these 2 centuries. It was very easy to digest, it was something that filled you up, and it was a great way to repurpose any stale bread you had. The appeal of milk toast was pretty good in that regard. You got a filling, sweet dessert out of it, And you also got to take care of any bread that was about to go bad. For low-income families, milk toast was a good way to stretch very limited resources. Stale bread works just fine with warm milk, and in rural areas where families had their own cattle and cows or access to fresh dairy at wholesale prices, it was even more of a thing. Number 23, the egg salad sandwich on toasted white. 6 hard-boiled eggs chopped fine with a pastry cutter, mixed with Hellmann's, a spoon of yellow mustard, a pinch of celery seed, and a little chopped sweet pickle relish. Spread thick on 2 slices of toasted Wonder Bread, cut on the diagonal, served on a heavy diner plate with a pickle spear, a handful of rippled potato chips on a paper doily, and a small dish of cottage cheese with 1 orange wedge balanced on top. 29 cents at a Woolworth counter in 1971. The egg salad sandwich was the workhorse of every dime store lunch counter in the country. The one item the kitchen could make in volume and hold in the case all afternoon without losing quality. It disappeared because the lunch counter disappeared around it. Office workers stopped going downtown for lunch when the shopping malls drew the foot traffic out to the suburbs, and the regulars who ate 3 of these a week at the same chrome swivel stool every Tuesday simply stopped having a counter to walk to. Number 20, chicken pot pie. The crust was a sheet of pie dough laid flat across a deep hotel pan, and your filling was a thick stew of diced white meat, peas, carrots, and a roux made from chicken fat and flour. The whole pan baked for 45 minutes until the crust browned in patches. A square spatula cut servings the size of a paperback book. Steam came up off the gravy when your crust broke open. Cafeteria pot pie was one of the few items that crossed every American region with the same recipe, like a weather map drawn in pastry, because the USDA distributed surplus chicken to schools under the same commodity program from 1955 onward. The pies stopped appearing on most lines after 2012 because the crust carried too much saturated fat. Districts replaced them with chicken stew over a whole grain biscuit. Name rumaki, and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really, really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are, like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? So this time, our influences lie right in the heart of European and British culture. Coronation chicken was actually something people made for the first time in 1953 to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II and her, well, coronation. This was a cold curried chicken salad that was pretty much very similar to what we just discussed, but was still a little new. It was created specifically by Constance Spry for the coronation, and she was a very renowned chef. Alongside Rosemary Hume, both were credited with making this fine dish. It was actually supposed to have been inspired by Jubilee chicken, which was another chicken salad that had been made for a previous king. Still, coronation chicken was a little special in how it was built. While it was clearly made to appeal to the European palate, it was also designed to be very compatible with international tastes too. That was probably influenced by the effect of globalization, but I'm glad they made it that way. The original recipe for coronation chicken was pretty simple. It just had poached chicken and a curry-based sauce that had been loaded with aromatics. The sauce really emphasized using apricot puree or dried apricots, and that gave the dish both a savory and a sweet direction. Though America was still pretty much in full-time recovery, coronation chicken was steadily on its way to becoming one of the most prominent salads of the century. The chicken aspect is what really made it click with people here. While people were definitely used to already having bits of meat in their salads to make them exciting, see, a lot of them weren't used to the way coronation chicken used aromatics. The chicken was so blatantly driven by the flavors of the curry-like sauce, which really was a new treat for lots of Americans. Then, it was also pretty accessible. It was really easy to make Coronation chicken, even at home. You could pretty much get it going for any kind of event, a party, a picnic, or just a healthier day focused on greener eating. People definitely have applied their own spins on this dish and taken it in new directions, but Coronation chicken is still pretty much a big symbol of the impact European, and in specific, British cooking has left on America. It was also really easy to make this in post-World War America, where the economy still hadn't fully settled. A lot of people were still really trying to keep their pantries full and had ingredients missing for typical American meals like casseroles and meatloaves. They made do with a lot of Depression-era food, but this salad was easy and cheap enough to make. That definitely did help it gain more steam. To be honest, it was also a big part of the overall trend of people going for lighter, more refreshing vegetable-based meals, although that hadn't completely begun in America, not just yet. Space food sticks were something that Pillsbury came up with in the 1990s, and this was a snack that had, as you can guess from the name itself, a lot of themes centered around the starry and cold expanse that is space. It was also meant to be designed with astronauts in mind. No, they weren't selling the stuff to astronauts, but they knew what they had to pull with children. At the time, in the 1980s, there was nothing that invoked a sense of adventure and thrill more nigh a child than an astronaut braving all odds and going to space just like their favorite superheroes. So when they got the food sticks, you can only guess how well the advertising and packaging may have worked. These dry sticks were peanut butter, caramel, and chocolate flavored, and its whole shtick was how it was space food. That definitely made it catch on even more with kids who were younger and a lot more gullible, but hey, it had a long shelf life, it was transportable, and it was cheap enough. What kind of parent passes up on a good snack to shut your kid up with? So, you might be surprised to hear this one, but people actually got enough turnip stew and dumplings to make a meal out of it. You might be thinking dumplings sound pretty expensive for a time when the wins themselves were stacked against your bank account, but hear me out. Dumplings were actually insanely economical, and loads of Americans had begun to make real efforts to learn how to make some good ones. Dumplings used flour, water, fat, and some baking powder. All of this basically costs around 5 to 10 cents individually, minus the fat and water. Since people usually wouldn't have fat to work with, they'd use lard. People were making dumplings at home and mixing them up with stews, broths, and just about everything else they worked with. Now, turnips, on the other hand, those were the actual tricky things to get. It's exactly because they were easy to cultivate and one of the few things that actually worked with the climate of the Great Plains that people were so quick to ravage the stores for them. As a side effect of that, most people simply resorted to growing them in their gardens, because at least you'd know for a fact you'd wake up to some turnips. So the techniques that people picked up with dumplings helped them out in other areas too. 29. Cottage cheese and fruit plate. Every lunch counter had a version of this, and none of them looked the same. Some gave you half a canned peach sitting on a leaf of iceberg lettuce with a scoop of cottage cheese beside it. Others arranged pineapple rings, pear halves, and a cherry on top like a small edible centerpiece. It was the meal women ordered when they wanted something light, and it came on a cold plate in the middle of summer when nothing hot sounded good. Try ordering a cottage cheese plate at any fast food counter today. You will get a blank stare. Before I go further, for the folks who want more recipes like these gathered in one place, I put together the Vintage Recipe Guide. You can find it at my website, vintagelifestyleusa.com. I will not push it again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, back to the list. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were what happened when your parents wanted to show off a little. Elvis Presley supposedly ate them by the dozen, which gave them some sort of mythical cool factor. But even without the king's endorsement, they were the kind of lunch that made you feel like royalty. Greasy, sticky royalty. The peanut butter glued everything together, while the bacon gave it that crunch you could hear 2 tables over. Sweet, salty, and absolutely heart-stopping. Literally. This was not diet food. This was your mom was feeling generous food. Served on white bread, maybe toasted if she had time, It was the sandwich version of getting away with something. You were not supposed to eat bacon for lunch. You were definitely not supposed to drown it in peanut butter. And yet, there it was, crammed into a sandwich bag and sweating by noon. By the time lunch rolled around, the bacon was soggy, the peanut butter had oozed out the sides, and it was still somehow perfect. Nobody makes them anymore. Maybe that is for the best. But once upon a time, it was the king of brown bag lunches. Yes, you heard it here first, skunk stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten. Not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum. Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Sorghum syrup sandwiches were sugar for the poor and fuel for the strong. A thick smear of dark syrup between two biscuits or slices of white bread turned into instant energy for men working fields or hauling timber. Sorghum grew easy in southern soil, and the syrup mills were the heart of many small towns come harvest season. The sandwich itself was sticky and simple, sweetness caught between starch, just messy enough to make it real. It was the kind of food children would sneak before chores, and grown folks would pack for long days when they needed something to push them through. Sorghum was more than a sweetener. It was survival in a jar, and it stayed good for months. The taste was rich, earthy, and honest, a little bitter around the edges, just like life itself. Liverwurst sandwiches were a staple in many mid-century American kitchens, reflecting the influence of German-American food traditions. Liverwurst, a spreadable sausage made from liver and spices, was sliced or smeared onto bread, often with onions or mustard to enhance the flavor. It was inexpensive, protein-rich, and easy to prepare, making it a practical lunch for families on a budget. Children sometimes resisted its strong taste, but adults appreciated it as a hearty and flavorful option. In many immigrant households, it was a taste of home that connected them to European roots. Grocery stores in the 1950s commonly carried liverwurst alongside other processed meats, and advertisements promoted it as modern convenience food. It was often wrapped in paper at the deli counter and served as an everyday staple rather than a luxury. The liverwurst sandwich embodied the era's focus on practicality, thrift, and simple nourishment. For those who grew up with it, the strong taste still brings back memories of packed lunches and family kitchens where nothing went to waste. Egg food. Corned beef salad sandwiches are a creamy and savory blend of deli-style corned beef. They typically come mixed with your usual suspects. A little bit of mayonnaise here, some mustard there, and if you really want to be extra, some chopped pickles. These get served between sandwich bread in specific, but if you don't have that, any normal white bread will also do. So these actually have a tangier taste than you would think. And to combat that, a lot of people would also use the honey mustard sauce as a substitute for mayonnaise or even pair it up with the mayonnaise. Some versions would also throw in scrambled eggs or shredded lettuce for a better texture that plays with the corned beef itself. This is something that was extremely popular in America during the middle of the 20th century, especially after World War II ended. People were trying to bounce back from the effects of it all, and canned meats really helped save some bucks. It's something you started seeing not just at work, but at school lunches, picnics, and even potlucks, and this was doubly true for the Midwest and different parts of the South. Number 17. tongue on rye with mustard. The slice was 1/4 of an inch thick, fanned across the rye in 3 overlapping pieces, topped with a smear of horseradish and a single round of yellow mustard. Beef tongue was cheap at the wholesale market on 14th Street, simmered for 4 hours with onions and bay leaves, peeled while still warm, and sliced cold on the bias. A tongue sandwich was 35 cents at Katz's in 1956. The flavor was rich and beefy, the texture more tender than brisket ever reached. The sandwich held its place on Jewish deli counters and corner luncheonettes through the late 70s. And then beef prices dropped. The immigrant generation aged out. The kids stopped ordering it. Katz's still serves it. Almost nobody else does. Your grandfather knew the rail cook by his first name, and the rail cook knew which mustard he wanted before he sat down. One of the most popular things that people would ever eat back in the day was bread with meat drippings. Despite what you might think, this is really just stale bread with leftover drippings that were squeezed out. People weren't fond of letting the drippings go to waste back then. They could be used as a cooking fat, as a dip, or as a coating to increase flavor. Poor people would generally try their best to keep a steady supply of them. This was also one of the most popular meals to come out of the Great Depression because of how economical it was. It also luckily worked better with bran and rye bread instead of the fluffy, white wheat flour one we're used to. That meant that the dish was able to hit a bigger audience because a lot of people were barred from ever being able to buy fluffy white flour-based bread. These were okay, really. Just an average breakfast to get you started, but they were wonderful at stretching out the pantry and making sure things stay for as long as possible. Also, if there's ever something you need toast for, but you're just out of butter, syrup, or whatever. Number 18, the Walgreens banana split. 3 scoops of ice cream lined up in a long boat-shaped glass dish, vanilla in the middle, chocolate on one end, strawberry on the other. A whole banana split lengthwise tucked against the scoops on both sides. 3 syrups poured one over each scoop, chocolate over vanilla, marshmallow over chocolate, pineapple or strawberry over the strawberry. A halo of whipped cream piped from a metal canister, 3 maraschino cherries set on top, and a handful of chopped peanuts scattered across the whole landscape. Walgreens kept this on the menu because the soda fountain was where the chain started in 1920. The banana split left the counter in 1985 when the last Walgreens fountain in Chicago closed for good. The cost of a soda jerk who could build a split in under 90 seconds had become higher than the price the chain was willing to charge for the dish. Number 24, fish sticks with tartar sauce. They came frozen in a wax-lined case of 200, breaded, golden, and rectangular, baked on a sheet pan for 15 minutes at 400 degrees. Friday was fish day in most American school districts because the Catholic kids needed the option, and once your kitchen was set up for them, the rule stayed for everyone. The tartar sauce was a paper cup of mayonnaise and pickle relish from the lunch lady's own bowl. 3 sticks per tray, a scoop of mac and cheese on the side, a square of cornbread. Kids who grew up watching Friday fish trays slide down the line still smell the lemon wedges when they pass a freezer aisle. The fish came from Atlantic pollock fillets caught off Massachusetts. By 2014, the breading carried too much sodium for elementary trays. The recipe simply walked off the menu. Is Marie-Antoine Carême, but you can thank her for some amazing dishes such as the vol au vent. This is actually something that got so popularized in American cookbooks in the mid-20th century. In the 1970s, when a national interest in foreign cooking really started popping off in America, there were a lot of trends centered around haute cuisine, and especially things you would find in premium French restaurants. In French-American communities, a vol au vent was a typical Saturday lunch that you would find being served up by your grandmother. Marie-Antoine Carême is a legendary French chef, and a reason she got that acclaim was because she managed to make up dishes that would suit the average household. Vol au vent is actually not really something you'd find at a 5-star restaurant or on the upper end of what your wallet could afford. Most people would treat this like a party meal, something to serve at cocktail parties or New Year's ones. It was just puff pastry filled in with chicken, mushrooms, and creamy sauces, but it blended all of those together to make a really warm and earthy taste, which makes it perfectly suited to something you'd associate with your grandma's table. So not every origin story is that clear-cut and dry. If you take a look at chop suey, for example, then it's actually got a lot of myths surrounding it. So, the name itself comes from tsop sui, which is a Cantonese phrase that literally translates to mixed pieces. Now, there are a couple of different ideas surrounding the inception of this. Some people think it was referring to a peasant mix of leftover vegetables that would be stir-fried, and it was typically made using leftover scraps of meat and soy sauce. Some others think that it was a southern Chinese classic, and some others still think that it was Chinese-American immigrants that first brought it over. One of the most iconic legends actually involves those same waves of immigrants. It suggests that in the 1860s in San Francisco, a Chinese chef originally made the dish for workers returning from a mining expedition. Apparently, they loved it so much that the dish stuck around fairly well. A lot of the academic debate on this leans towards this story being a hoax, though. Most likely bet is just that Cantonese people brought it over with them. Either way, take your pick as to how this started. The more interesting part is how it became a symbol of Chinatown and Chinese-American cuisine. A lot of the restaurants that were around back in the day with a focus on Chinese cuisine adapted chop suey because of how much of a hit it was with the broader population. It was mild, flavor-wise, nothing that would really step on your toes or be too out there in terms of what it was trying to do. It also looked really pretty, so you felt like you were eating this fancy foreign recipe that's pretty traditional and like a family secret passed down through generations. At least that's how people romanticized it. In reality, it was just a pretty palatable stir-fry that managed to catch a lot of people's eyes. It got its fair share of love in popular Chinese media too, and you'd always see advertisements for it whenever you'd cross any Chinatown. Plus, it was a part of Chinese culture that people could gawk at and also eat without worrying. What I mean by that is that it was financially accessible. I know you're probably thinking that's a lot of words to say. It was pretty cheap, but give me a little benefit of the doubt. I don't just mean cheap for the average income household back then. I mean affordable, like for everyone. It didn't matter what tax bracket you were in, you could definitely enjoy chop suey. Plus, it was this really steamy, hot dish that had a lot of natural flavors in it, so it became a sort of wintertime comfort food sensation as well. It definitely had a pretty strong grip on the 1910s, and though it's not as popular now as it was then, it's still a hallmark of Chinese-American flavors. Easy comfort food that'll keep your kids filled and quiet, Hunt's Snack Pack Chocolate Pudding was arguably the undisputed heavyweight champ of this stuff. It was packaged in these small metal cans, and it could easily be put into a lunchbox, so it already had packaging and portability covered. Hey, believe it or not, that's a big marketing goal for snacks to fill. The easier it is to walk around with them and pop one open whenever you need it, the better it sells. And that's just not something Hunt's Snack Pack Chocolate Pudding ever had to worry about. Plus, that was the early days of the pudding. Later on, the design went from a plastic cup and it was made even more lunchbox friendly. Also, probably their best quality was the fact that you didn't need to refrigerate these, and then they also came in a lot of different flavors beyond just chocolate, so suffice it to say this thing had all the steam and creativity it needed to capture a serious chunk of the market itself, and kids were definitely enamored with what they were getting. You'd always hear a kid or two begging their parents to get the chocolate pudding in most typical grocery stores, so if you were around in the 80s, you definitely know what I'm talking about. Well, historians would pretty much agree with potatoes being the popular choice. Particularly, having potatoes with onion soup and bread was another way for people to tick off 3 things from their daily routines: nutrition, a full meal, and enough food to go around the entire table. Potatoes were pretty much just 5 cents per pound, and this was right around the earliest years. The reason you wanted to keep a massive stock of these bad boys was because they were built for survival situations. They last like literally forever. I mean, I think I've had a few potatoes that have been around since the Prohibition. Secondly, their other name is versatility. Fry it, boil it, steam it, mash it, or dice it. Whatever way you repurpose a potato, you'll get a damned good meal out of it. Plus, the fact that they're full of carbs makes them one of the best things to eat during a drought because it keeps your appetite low. Bread and onions were pretty much priced around the same price point, and that meant that people were able to make a good soup out of the 3 pretty easily. Now let's be real. People were definitely lowballing their standards just to be able to enjoy the meal, especially after like the 56th time they had it, but it was still a lot easier to swallow than other alternatives. Number 23. Chicken a la king on toast points. Diced chicken in a thick cream sauce with green peas, diced pimento, and sometimes a splash of sherry, served over triangles of toast cut corner to corner. This was the lunch counter's version of elegance. The Schrafft's chain in New York served it on real china. The Woolworths in Topeka served it on a divided plastic plate. The sauce was always pale yellow and impossibly rich. The dish had been a hotel dining room staple since the 1890s, but the lunch counter democratized it. For 75 cents, you got what the Waldorf charged $3 for. By the 1980s, it was gone from almost every menu, replaced by nothing in particular. It just stopped appearing. American chop suey in a Tupperware bowl was the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Pasta, ground beef, tomato sauce, and whatever else your mom had lying around. It was not pretty, but it filled you up. The noodles were usually elbows, the meat was always overcooked, and the sauce was probably from a jar. Still, it had heart. It had the kind of comfort only a plastic lid could seal in. You would open it at lunch, and the steam would hit your face like a warm blanket that smelled like oregano. Some kids wrinkled their noses, others traded a fruit roll-up for a few bites. It was the kind of lunch that got better the longer it sat. Something about the way the noodles soaked up the sauce made it taste like home. And if it was cold, even better. You could fork it straight from the fridge and feel like a rebel. It was not Chinese, it was not Italian, it was just American. And it worked. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South in African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Cold fried chicken thighs were not made for picnics or company. They were working man's food. The chicken was usually fried in lard the night before, seasoned simply with salt and pepper, then packed into tin pails while it was still warm. By the time lunchtime came, the crust had softened, the fat had settled, and the flavor had deepened into something only patience could make. Miners, loggers, and farmhands ate it straight from the bone, with biscuits or cornbread if they were lucky. It was greasy, hearty, and reliable, one of those meals that filled you up without fuss. Fried chicken was too precious to waste, so the thighs and legs went to work while the white meat stayed home for Sunday. Every bite carried the memory of the skillet's sizzle, the smell of home kitchens that kept the mountains fed even when the world forgot them. Cheese and relish sandwiches were quick, zesty fillers that became popular in the 1950s, lunchboxes and office lunches. A slice of American cheese paired with sweet pickle relish on bread created a sandwich that was simple yet flavorful. Housewives liked it because it required no cooking and made use of processed foods that were inexpensive and widely available. Children appreciated the sweet tang of relish, which made even plain cheese taste more exciting. This sandwich often appeared at picnics, church potlucks, and factory lunch breaks, proving how versatile it was. Cheese was sold in packages that lasted for weeks, while relish jars stretched across dozens of sandwiches, making the combination budget-friendly. It reflected the mid-century shift toward convenience foods that still felt homemade. Though modest, The cheese and relish sandwich carried enough flavor to keep it from feeling boring. For many, it was the taste of childhood afternoons, lunch counters, and the era's reliance on thrifty but dependable recipes. Open-faced cheese dreams turned simple ingredients into something that felt special enough to serve on real plates with proper attention. The preparation began with buttered bread topped with sliced cheese, then placed under the broiler until the cheese bubbled and turned golden brown at the edges. This wasn't merely cheese toast, but a composed dish that seniors living alone could make feel like an event worth sitting down to enjoy. The broiling transformed ordinary American or cheddar into something almost sophisticated, with crispy edges and molten centers that satisfied deeply. Some cooks added tomato slices beneath the cheese, variations that stretched a simple concept into infinite possibilities. For those cooking alone, cheese dreams offered portion control, since each slice of bread represented a deliberate serving. The ingredients cost mere pennies and required no special shopping, making this lunch accessible any day. Though the name has faded from vocabulary, broiled cheese on toast remains comfort food at its purest. Cold roast beef sandwiches are the perfect example of how less is sometimes more, and this wasn't just more, it was iconic. You've got some juicy roast beef, slice after slice stacked on top of each other, sandwiched between slightly crusty white bread. It's literally a Scooby-Doo snack. The beef is something seasoned with salt, pepper, and a lot of mustard, or horseradish. It's actually something that packs a pretty substantial kick. Now, sometimes people would add a slice of cheddar or Swiss cheese and throw in some fresh vegetables like lettuce and tomatoes. But the star of this show was always that decadent, juicy roast beef that was just thin enough. It had an incredibly satisfying flavor, and it was something that was really just carried by the natural flavors that were already there. No extra work needed. Cold roast beef sandwiches were something that became really common to see in American lunchboxes and deli counters by the early 20th century, especially during and after the wartime era and the Great Depression. It was one of the most economical lunches you could get for yourself, and people really wanted to be spending as little on food as possible, which is pretty different from our mindset today. Number 16. Tuna melt. A short-order rail, one hot afternoon in 1959, tipped a bowl of tuna salad onto a half-grilled cheese sandwich and decided to keep going. The whole thing got pressed flat on the griddle and slid onto the plate. The customer asked for another. Within 3 years, the tuna melt was on lunch rails everywhere. Tuna salad on rye or sourdough, a single slice of cheese on top, a slick of butter on the griddle, heavy press for roughly 2 minutes each side. The cheese melted down into the tuna, the bread browned, the whole thing came off hot and a little messy. The fast food kitchens replaced the press with a panini machine, and the panini machine turned the tuna melt into something tighter and drier and entirely less interesting than the original. By the way, if any of these sandwiches sound like one your mother used to fix at home, I put together a recipe guide that walks through more like them. The proportions, the bread choices, the right way to cut a sandwich on the diagonal, and the small kitchen tricks the countercooks use to keep the lettuce crisp and the bacon hot through a 6-hour shift. The link is just below. Bean sandwiches were one of the most important staples for people living not just in the 20th century, but for people all over America for thousands of years. So many of the beans we've become so accustomed to were literally the lifeblood of several communities for a long time. Pinto beans, navy beans, kidney beans, black eye beans, these may be things that we just occasionally use in a salad nowadays, but for a lot of people, having these was the difference between meeting your budget for the month and having to get a loan from somewhere. You could make bean sandwiches with a minimal amount of beans, and they were able to provide some much-needed nutrition and protein in people's diets that they otherwise wouldn't be getting. Some people were not even able to afford the awful cuts of meat or the very cheap ones that butchers would typically discard. They would save whatever meat they had for weekends, celebrations, or for when they really couldn't tolerate eating a makeshift bare-bones meal anymore. Bean sandwiches, thus, were really good at sustaining families, and they were the food of choice for people who had labor-intensive, physically demanding jobs back then, such as factorymen. Number 19. The hot roast beef plate. This was what every truck driver ordered before the night haul out of Cleveland. The dish promised at the top of this list, and it earned that promise 3 times over. 2 thick slices of roast beef carved from a top round that had been in the oven since 6 in the morning, laid over a single slice of white bread that soaked up the juice. A separate mound of mashed potatoes beside it with a well in the middle for more gravy. Brown gravy ladled hot over everything until the plate was almost swimming. A side of canned green beans cooked down with bacon fat, and a hard dinner roll wrapped in cellophane. The roast beef plate was the meal a working man ordered when he had 4 hours of driving ahead of him and 1 chance to eat before the next stop. The waitress in her paper crown brought it on the same heavy oval platter she used for the hot turkey, and the chrome swivel stools spun a quarter turn every time he reached for the salt. The plate disappeared in stages. First, the roasting ovens went out of the counters because the gas bills climbed faster than the lunch crowd grew. Then the carving station went out because slicing meat to order made no sense once frozen patties existed. Then the gravy went out because the kitchens with no carving station no longer had pan drippings, and powdered gravy mix made every plate taste the same. By 1979, the hot roast beef plate had moved from the lunch counter to the church basement and the Union Hall, where volunteer cooks still roasted a real piece of beef. Now it lives only in the muscle memory of a generation of drivers who could tell you which exit had a counter that still served it. Number 22. Tater tots. They arrived in a 15-pound box from Oreida, frozen into perfect cylinders the size of a child's thumb. The cafeteria oven held 6 sheet pans at once, 400 degrees for 20 minutes. No flipping required. A scoop and a half went on each tray, salted from a steel shaker the lunch lady refilled every morning before the bell. Tater tots were the side that made every other side acceptable. You would push the corn around the compartment and eat the tots first, then dip the Salisbury steak in ketchup and eat it second, then drink the milk last. The pattern was as fixed as the bell schedule. Modern cafeteria fryers have been removed from most American elementary schools under the saturated fat rules. But the tots survive in some districts only as baked oven varieties, drier and lighter. The crispness is gone. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else. But Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical Southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies. And this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? So, sloppy joes are actually such an interesting thing to talk about. Did you know how much history is behind this sandwich? It seems like a far-fetched idea since it's pretty much just a tomato sauce spread over bread with ground beef, but it really does have some pretty deep roots. So, the sloppy joe actually goes all the way back to 1930, and this was right after the stock market crash was fresh in everyone's minds. People were struggling to cope with the after effects, and as the shocks of the collapse rippled through America, they slowly started losing more and more of the things they once expected were normal parts of the day. Now, the need for easy, accessible, cheap, and nutritious food was becoming more and more of a priority for Americans. Naturally, they weren't working with a lot, so they had to put something on the table. Right before the sloppy joe, in around the 1920s, there was what you could call the prototype joe. This was basically known as a loose meat sandwich, and it involved ground meat sandwiched in between bread. The only thing that was missing? The iconic tomato sauce that a sloppy joe is known for. These weren't ever served with sauces, but all the same, they were one of the most popular kinds of sandwiches to get. This was pretty much the inspiration for sloppy joes, which fit every need Americans had surrounding their diet. They were easy, they were cheap, they were delicious for the cost and effort, and they took no time. On top of that, the government decided to make things even easier for once by really going all in on canned goods. The increased manufacture in the 30s and 40s meant that canned tomato goods like sauces and ketchup became incredibly popular. After that, it was only natural for sloppy joes to take over as the new sandwich that would reign at the top of America's food scene. It was so much more than just a trend, though. It became a part of the culture. The sloppy joe was the people's answer to a harsh time that had been thrown upon them out of literally nowhere. While people struggled to make ends meet and provide, they found some kind of comfort in knowing that they could at least make a joe without worrying about food stocks or going out to buy meat the next day. I mean, it was more sauce than ground beef anyway. What it always will be is a great time and a classic reminder of how people got around the chaos that the Depression caused. I bet you didn't ever think a sloppy joe could have that much of a backstory behind it, but hey, stranger things happen. It's actually a little heartwarming, don't you agree? Either way, I'm going to appreciate the next sloppy joe just a little bit more. How do you make yours? Over the years, people have really found some variations and have started adding to the original meat, sauce, and bread recipe. If you have any interesting takes, don't gatekeep them. Drop them down in the comments below. Lipton's a pretty global brand. You could go from America to Pakistan and still recognize it, but it was in the 70s that they were known for a very specific kind of instant lunch that was a lot like cup noodles were, but think of the textures of spaghetti instead of what you would normally associate with instant noodles. Muggo lunch came in flavors like spaghetti, noodles with cheese sauce, and even barbecue. And its biggest selling point was easily that this is a pretty convenient lunch to pack for your kid as they merrily embark on their way to school. It actually didn't get its start that way, though. It started as an after-school snack that parents would serve to their kids, but they then saw the value of sending them to school with it. It was more popular with kids in grade school because they had a better appreciation for things like this. Usually, kids in elementary stuck to some pretty basic foods, but there was one issue with Muggo lunch. You needed hot water to prepare it, and sometimes, some parents would expect the kids to do that themselves, though the reason is beyond me. Anyway, not every school had access to hot water, so Muggo lunch eventually faded out in favor of more accessible lunches. Chili beans and crushed crackers were just another meal from the never-ending nightmare that was the 1930s. But this one's just a bit more special than the rest. Maybe it's the one that got away in the entire history of food in the States. Maybe it's just how it became a staple of the culture later on, but this one always stood out. Chili beans and crackers were more than just a way to fill up for the evening. They were sometimes all you had. It wouldn't be so irregular to come back home from work, the most grueling shift of the week now safely behind you, and immediately be greeted by a bowl of chili beans and crushed crackers. The Dust Bowl wasn't just a time when people's wallets ran dry, it was also a time when their fields did too. It was very common for crops to fail, and families would often just live off of the tiny bits they could salvage. Basically, chili beans were the only recourse left to people in times like that. The last line of defense, you could say. It wasn't expensive, it filled you up, and it tasted just a bit more normal than everything else. You could say it was probably one of the few things people were eating that actually even had any taste anymore. You could get the entire thing in about 15 cents, and it would make you a lot happier. Guess that's why people look back on it with so much sentimentality. What do you think? Any comforting memories you can stir up and associate with a bowl of chili beans? So, number 27, Welsh rarebit, melted cheddar cheese mixed with a splash of beer, a pinch of dry mustard, and Worcestershire sauce, poured hot over thick toast. It came from England, but ended up on almost every drugstore lunch counter in America by the 1940s. The name confused people then, and it confuses people now. It has nothing to do with rabbits. Rarebit was rich enough to count as a full meal and fast enough to make during a 15-minute lunch break. You could sit at the Walgreens soda fountain in Chicago and eat one while your prescription was being filled. When cheese became something you unwrapped from plastic, rarebit quietly lost its reason to exist. It came in a little metal tin with a key you had to crank open like a can of paint, and inside was a pinkish meat paste that somehow became the crown jewel of school lunches across the country. Deviled ham sandwiches on Wonder Bread were the kind of thing your mom would pack with the same confidence as someone handing you a gold bar. It was salty, it was tangy, and it had that uncanny ability to smell up the entire lunchroom in 5 seconds flat. There was no middle ground. You either prayed for a trade or guarded it like it was national treasure. And let us not forget the bread. Wonder Bread, so white and soft it almost melted when you touched it. It was less of a sandwich and more of an edible napkin wrapped around a meat mystery. Kids today could not even imagine something like this being edible, let alone desirable. But back then, it was what you looked forward to after recess. It was what reminded you that even if you forgot your homework, at least your lunch was unforgettable. Somehow, deviled ham became a status symbol for a very specific kind of childhood chaos. Creamed peas on toast were a very simple and inexpensive meal that helped many people get through the day in the 1960s, especially throughout rural America. Peas were man's best friend because of how abundant they were. You could also throw them on top of anything for a better crunch and flavor, or you could just make breakfast meals out of them like this. The 1960s were seen as a transitional period for the culinary world in America. Processed convenience foods were slowly starting to dominate, but working-class homes were going to feel the change later than others. They were still relying on home-cooked meals that had been passed down from family to family. That's pretty much how it would work in a lot of rural areas. People would find out a great idea, record it, pass it down to their kids. Sometimes that would be ways to farm or maintain the home. And other times it would be how to have a breakfast that saves you money. A can of peas cost just a few cents, and it did the job better than anything else if you didn't have beans on hand, so why not? I mean, it's a lot better than just toast. Potato cakes from leftover mash were the quiet heroes of mountain kitchens. You mixed yesterday's mashed potatoes with flour, salt, and maybe an egg if you had one, then fried them in lard until the edges turned crisp. They were soft inside and golden outside, wrapped in cloth to stay warm for the noontime break. Whether eaten with onions or just plain, they were the kind of food that filled the stomach and felt familiar. They started as supper leftovers but became a comfort in their own right, passed from hand to hand in lunch tins and brown paper. Nothing fancy, just good sense and good flavor. Every family had their way of making them, but they all shared the same goal, stretching a meal into tomorrow. Tomato soup with saltines became one of the quintessential lunches of the 1950s, thanks to Campbell's and the growing popularity of canned convenience foods. Housewives valued it because they could open a can, add water or milk, heat it on the stove, and have lunch ready in minutes. Saltines, crisp and salty, were stacked on top or crumbled into the soup, making it heartier. For children, this was the warm bowl they remembered coming home to on chilly afternoons, filling the house with a rich tomato aroma. Parents liked it because it was inexpensive, dependable, and easy to keep stocked in the pantry. Advertisements during the era promoted it as nourishing and family-friendly, tying it to the image of wholesome domestic life. The pairing of soup and crackers became a symbol of mid-century American eating, where practicality and comfort came first. Families who grew up in the 1950s often look back fondly on tomato soup and saltines as the meal that never failed to bring warmth on a cold day. Ham, creamed corn on toast transformed a humble canned vegetable into a warm, comforting lunch that could be ready in minutes. Seniors living alone during the 1950s and 1960s often kept cans of creamed corn stacked in pantries, knowing they could heat one on the stovetop and pour it directly over buttered toast for a filling midday meal. The cream-style corn needed no additional preparation, its thick texture clinging to the bread while the natural sweetness balanced the butter's richness. Some cooks added a dash of black pepper, but the dish required no elaborate seasoning to satisfy. For those on fixed incomes, creamed corn represented remarkable value at roughly 15 cents per can, enough to top 2 or 3 slices of toast. The combination provided both carbohydrates and vegetables, offering balanced nutrition without complicated cooking. This was practical food for practical people, requiring only a saucepan and 5 minutes of attention. Though largely forgotten today, creamed corn on toast once filled stomachs across America. We're going to start our list off with a plowman's lunch, which is actually a dish best served cold. This little work of art features a lot of sharp cheddar cheese, which definitely makes it a hit with fans of dairy. The next thing that makes a plowman's lunch so zesty and flavorful is pickled onions and a good layer of Branston pickles for safe measuring. Now, all you need is some crusty bread and some hard-boiled eggs, and you pretty much have lunch served. It was more common for people to take things like cold cuts of meat, pork pies, or an apple slice for some variety in the food, but eggs were the one thing you would see non-stop with this dish. It's a pretty well-balanced blend of different flavors. You have a nice little vinegary tang from the pickles, but it doesn't get overwhelming thanks to the cheese helping to cut through all that. Eventually, the cheese mixes really well with the bread, and after it sets and coats the pickles in there, you get an incredibly delicious meal. This was a meal right out of the 50s and 60s, and funnily enough, this was something that was marketed by the Cheese Bureau in Britain so that cheese sales could go up a lot. And so the thing back then with lunch was that you really wanted it to be portable. You didn't have a little deli on the corner with a killer quesadilla or Uber Eats back then. Dishes were often made with energy and transportability in mind, and that's why stuff like meat hand pies got as popular as they did. Not only were they really easy to stuff in your bag and walk around, but they were resistant to getting spoiled, so they could stay in there for quite a while if you got your break late, no worries. As far as the taste went, it goes down just like any meat pie, though most people were fond of using different cuts of pork and ground beef. A historical act about these is that during the 19th century, they were pretty much the ideal lunch for Cornish tin miners. The reason was that since mine workers usually had dirty hands, they would grip the pie by the edge of the crust and eat the rest, throwing away the part that got dirty. They got popular because of how satisfying the flavor is, though. It's rich and meaty, and that buttery crust with a peppery seasoning only helps to elevate this humble pie into a proper midday lunch. Number 24. Leverwurst on rye with raw onion. The smell hit you before you saw the plate, like wet leather and pepper, and the bite of raw onion came right behind. Boar's Head sliced the loaf thick at every Liggett's drugstore in Brooklyn through the 50s. The counterman layered it on seeded rye with a sharp ring of yellow onion, a smear of brown mustard, and a single dill spear set off to the side. The sandwich was loud. The onion bit, the mustard cut through. The liverwurst itself was soft, a dusky pink paste of pork liver and fat that the immigrant butchers in Yorkville had been making for 30 years before it ever reached the rail. You could eat one standing up in 4 minutes and walk back to the shop full of it. But the kids would not eat organ meats anymore by 1975. The doctors were warning about cholesterol. By 2024, Boar's Head stopped making liverwurst entirely. There was a generation of countercooks who could trim a liverwurst loaf in their sleep, and there is no one left now to teach the next one how. So lard sandwiches were very similar to bread and meat drippings in the way they were used. Instead of being a standalone dip, though, or a cooking fat used to toast the bread, these were instead coated with lard. The idea was to use it as a spread and basically just make a sandwich that way. What people would do to spice it up if they could is add scraps of meat if there were any, or some potatoes. They would mash them up, fry them lightly, and use the cutlets as a makeshift patty. It would actually work sometimes, but it was also a lot of work. The good thing about lard sandwiches was that they were ridiculously time efficient. It takes about 2 minutes maximum to make these, and then you have your lunch for work ready. Plus, it helps that people constantly feel rejuvenated thanks to the lard. It worked really well on those hard, labor-intensive days where you had nothing else to eat. It was also a fantastic option for long journeys because it was transportable, easy to carry, and high in energy and fat. However, it did spoil fast and easily, so it wasn't the most ideal solution for really long journeys. A good way to make it a bit better was to add root vegetables, mushrooms, and typical sandwich toppings to it, which I personally love doing. Number 17. Liver and onions blue plate. This was the Tuesday special at McCrory's, the Thursday special at Newberry's, and a standing order at every counter that still believed in iron-rich meals for working men. A thick slab of calf's liver dredged in seasoned flour and pan-fried in bacon fat. A heavy tangle of yellow onions cooked down slow until they were brown and sweet and almost jam-like. The two laid side by side on a blue-rimmed plate with mashed potatoes and a small dish of stewed tomatoes. 65 cents in 1973 at a McCrory counter in Pennsylvania. Liver fell off lunch counter menus by 1977, not because anyone forgot how to cook it, but because the younger generation that came up after the war associated organ meat with the rationing years their parents had endured. The kids wanted hamburger. The counters that kept liver on the board watched the orders drop from 40 a day to 4. Number 19. Rectangle cheese pizza. A frozen sheet of par-baked dough, 14 inches by 20, came stacked 12 to a case from a regional supplier. The kitchen ladled tomato sauce from a tilt skillet, spread it with the back of a serving spoon, then covered the whole sheet with 1.5 pounds of low-moisture mozzarella from a 5-pound bag. 8 minutes at 500 degrees, then the cook pulled the pan and cut it into 24 perfect rectangles with a long-handled wheel cutter. Each rectangle weighed about 4 ounces. In 1987, the line cost added up to 65 cents per serving, like a coin you could trade across the lunchroom. That was the cheapest hot entree the federal program allowed. The crust was thicker than a takeout pizza, almost focaccia, with a thin glaze of oil on the bottom from the parchment. The cheese cooled into a single rubbery layer that you could lift in one piece and eat folded over. Friday was rectangle pizza day in most American districts. Kids who hated the spinach side and pushed the orange wedge to one corner would still finish your rectangle pizza in 3 bites and ask whether seconds were left in the warming line. Lunch ladies learned to count the rectangles by the 3rd class through because the 8th grade boys came through last and would eat anything still warm. The recipe came from a 1988 USDA standardized cookbook distributed to school food service directors across all 50 states. Sister Mary Catherine, in a Cleveland parochial school, used the same recipe word for word, only doubled. The 2012 nutrition standards changed all of it. The dough now must be whole grain rich, the cheese must be reduced fat, the sodium per serving must come in under 480 milligrams. The original rectangle pizza carries closer to 700 milligrams in a single piece. What most people forget is that the cheese formula itself changed too, not just the crust. A modern version exists, made with cauliflower flour and reduced sodium cheese. But the texture and the smell are not the same. A child from 1986 would not recognize the slice on your tray. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South in African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? Perfection salad was actually made in the humble town of New Castle, Pennsylvania. It's a pretty interesting story, too. It begins with Mrs. John Elliott Cook, who had first invented the iconic recipe to win a contest. At the time, the popular one to win was always the Knox Gelatin Contest, which was a pretty annual occurrence. It was always the place to go to for recipes and ideas that were breaking the conventional mold of what food should look like. Being out of the box is really just the prelude here. The tip of the iceberg, you could say. This dish was built with the idea of showing off all the different things you could do with gelatin. See, by the 1900s, the popular consensus around gelatin was that it was a dish that just couldn't ever work in a savory context. Most people wouldn't bet 2 cents on any dish that tried to do so, and for a long while the idea was left pretty unexplored. Mrs. John Elliott Cook set out to change that completely. Perfection salad, which is a molded gelatin-based dish, actually makes use of a lot of different kinds of things. I mean, it's a little hard to get them all down, since recipes that are in circulation right now are pretty different from the original one that was cooked up by, well, Mrs. Cook, no pun intended. This salad was supposed to be made using green peppers, celery, pimientos, and olives, and it would most commonly be suspended in this tangy lemon and vinegar-flavored gelatin base. It was the very first time a recipe ever tried to switch it up and mix gelatin into the savory side of things. People were pretty concerned about this new concoction, and initially receptions were pretty cold towards it. That all changed when the salad actually managed to compete in the contest, eventually winning a calm little 3rd place for itself. That's pretty much the best advertisement you could ever get for yourself. In pop terms, it would be like launching off your career after winning America's Got Talent. Perfection salad wouldn't really stop its domination there. It would go on to become a countrywide staple too. I'm talking holiday meals, church lunches, brunches, and community celebrations. Basically, this thing was everywhere. It was marketed as a refined salad that really had a lot of new things to offer, and it was a time when salads didn't have the best public image to begin with either. Plus, it was a chance for people who were domestic cooks to show off their skill. Ever felt like impressing your neighbors, in-laws, or just your partner with your fancy cooking skills? You could easily go for a perfect salad and flex on them all. Nowadays, it's pretty much an artifact, but back then, it was really something to marvel at. People were totally not used to such a synchronized mix between sweet and savory, and when they did get to try it, they were left pretty shocked. It basically opened a lot of new doors for what flavors could work together, and it did all that in the form of a salad. That's a pretty serious resume. But back then, Danish rings were actually popular in some areas of America as a snack. They would hold way easier than Danish go-rounds, and the crunchiness of the ring itself made for the perfect snack. When you're having lunch, you don't really need a full-blown meal like you'd get at home, but you kind of want something that'll just put some pep back in your step. It would be pretty odd for some kid today to pull up with Danish rings to school, but I guess that just goes to show how times change, don't they? Personally, I think it's a little too old-fashioned for me. Danish rings might be all right as snacks, but taking it as a lunchbox every day might be a bit overboard. I'd definitely switch it up with some other items on the list to keep things fresh. They couldn't catch on as a mainstream snack though, because even if they held better than go-rounds, they would still tend to get squished or messy. Plus, it wasn't until the late 80s that parents went all in on convenience food and snacks for lunchboxes instead of homemade items. Namely, making homemade bread. You'd pair that up with lard spread and onion slices, and you'd pretty much be eating as good as someone could be during the bowl and the Depression. What a time, though, at least in retrospect. You have one of the worst economic crashes in documented history paired with Mother Nature having an equally historical fit. It's really no wonder that circumstances like that awoke the baker and home chef in a lot of people, probably just out of practicality. Anyway, back to homemade bread. So, for this, all you'd need is flour. Most people were using all-purpose flour since it was cheaper to work with. Water, yeast, and salt were the rest of the gang. If you couldn't get your hands on some yeast, sourdough starter would work well too. Honestly, one of the hardest things to get was just the sugar needed for the brain, since granulated sugar was getting pretty hard to come by. Next, the lard spread. So during this time, people really started adopting the mentality of not wasting anything, not even a single part of the animal. That definitely meant all the lard too, which people would hold on to exactly for days like this. On its own, it doesn't exactly inspire an appetite though, but with some onion slices? You've had worse. Number 30. Fried bologna sandwich. A thick slice of bologna, scored with a knife so it wouldn't curl, pressed flat on a hot griddle until the edges turned brown and crispy. 2 slices of soft white bread, a slap of yellow mustard, maybe a slice of American cheese if you asked for it. The whole thing cost a dime in 1961. It was the cheapest hot meal on the board, and truck drivers, factory workers, and teenagers on their lunch break all lined up for it. The trick was the scoring. Without those cuts, the bologna would buckle and curl in the center, leaving you with a dome of warm meat and cold bread around the edges. Every lunch counter cook knew this. No fast food chain ever figured out how to replicate that sear. They never tried. Number 2. Jell-O salad with shredded carrots was a betrayal that somehow got passed off as a side dish for decades. It looked like dessert and tasted like confusion. Your fork would go in expecting sweetness and come out with carrot bits clinging to neon green gelatin. No one knows who started it. Some say it came from the church potluck crowd. Others swear it was a prank gone too far. Either way, it ended up on cafeteria trays and family tables alike. You could not escape it. Lime Jell-O was the most common offender, but there were worse versions: orange, lemon, and the truly cursed cherry with celery. Moms called it a salad, so you would eat it. But there was no lettuce, no dressing, just the jiggling horror of a dessert that desperately wanted to be a vegetable. It was served with pride, too. People molded it into rings, decorated it with pineapple slices, and acted like it was gourmet. You had to pretend to like it, not out of politeness, but because the grown-ups genuinely thought it was good. It was one of the strangest culinary gaslights of the 20th century. And somehow, it stuck. Handmade butter used to be a really simple kitchen staple at home, and it started to be reborn as a gourmet product when people really got into the crafts and works aspect of it. See, people like things they made on their own. It gives them a chance to show off on Instagram, it gives them something to talk about with their friends, or it just becomes something cool to speak about on a date. You know, a cute and quirky little fact about yourself that helps break the ice. Besides that, there's also the authenticity and uniqueness of a completely 100% homegrown and homemade product. In a world full of preservatives, food dyes, artificial flavorings, and added vitamins and minerals, something that's actually just made out of the stuff God put on Earth and nothing else is a relief. The revival of artisanal butter throughout the 2000s to today was really helpful in giving it a new image. High-end restaurants started serving cultured butters, and they even started putting hand-churned ones up for sale. There was a premium price you had to pay, but man, the suburban moms fell for it so bad. If there's salad and egg sandwiches were spring's first gift after a long winter's wait. When pokeweed shoots pushed through thawed soil, foragers gathered them young before bitterness set in. The leaves were boiled 3 times to wash away poison, then chopped, drained, and fried in bacon grease until dark and rich. Layered with slices of hard-boiled egg between bread, it became a hearty field lunch, fresh, filling, and full of life. The greens gave a wild tang that spoke of earth and rain, while the eggs brought comfort and weight. It was food born from patience and care, a reward for knowing the land well enough to take only what it offered. In the mountains, such meals weren't poor. They were proof that nature always paid back in flavor and grace. Bologna and relish sandwiches were one of the most common budget lunches of the 1950s, relying on inexpensive luncheon meat paired with sweet pickle relish to add flavor. Bologna was cheap, widely available, and easy to slice for quick sandwiches. Housewives used it often because it filled stomachs without straining the grocery bill, while relish brightened the otherwise plain flavor. For children, this sandwich became a lunchbox standby, wrapped in wax paper and carried to school day after day. Adults also enjoyed it as a portable lunch at factories and offices, appreciating its simplicity. Processed meats were heavily marketed during the decade as modern and convenient, and bologna fit perfectly into that image. Relish, sold in jars that lasted weeks, was the thrifty housewife's secret weapon for adding zest. Together, they made a sandwich that was practical, satisfying, and reflective of the era's reliance on affordable processed foods. The bologna and relish sandwich remains a symbol of mid-century frugality and convenience, remembered fondly by many who grew up eating it regularly. Bread and milk bowl was the simplest possible lunch, yet it sustained seniors across America when appetites were small or budgets impossibly tight. This wasn't a recipe so much as a survival strategy, combining torn pieces of bread with cold or warm milk in a bowl, sometimes sprinkled with sugar. The bread softened in the milk, creating something between cereal and soup that required no cooking and minimal chewing. During the 1940s through the 1960s, many elderly folks turned to this combination when other foods seemed too heavy to prepare. The meal provided calcium from the milk and carbohydrates from the bread, offering basic nutrition when appetites had diminished. Some variations used stale bread specifically, since soaking in milk revived even the driest crusts. The dish cost mere pennies, making it accessible even during the leanest weeks before pension checks arrived. Children who visited grandparents often remembered seeing this humble bowl. Bread and milk bowl remains a powerful symbol of resourceful simplicity. A cold baked bean sandwich is what you think it is. It's just cold. 2 slices of modest bread, a familiar presence in the tomato-based sauce, with a generous spread of baked beans. The flavor is something that's a little bit sweet, a little bit tangy, but it's really just the textures that work here so well. The bread is chewy, but the beans mesh together as soon as you bite into them, and as the little bits of sauce squeezed out when you bite into the sandwich, it all makes for one flavorful bite. Cold baked bean sandwiches were a pretty common go-to lunch meal for people in the middle of the 20th century, especially in American households. This was even more true during the 40s, especially among blue-collar workers. Factory towns would often see people buying as much as canned beans as they could during grocery trips. People had a pretty practical approach to their food during these decades, and while the sandwich had no presentation or flair, it definitely got the job done. And it could do that for you today as well, because this is still as reliable of lunch now as it was back then, especially if you're pressed for time. Number 18. Watercress with butter. Trimming the crusts with a wet knife was how the small ceremony started. The bread was crustless white, paper thin, spread with sweet butter from end to end. Watercress went on rinsed and picked over, laid in a dense green carpet that almost glowed against the white. A second slice pressed on top, the sandwich cut into 4 neat triangles on a paper doily. A department store clerk on her lunch break, a teacher on a 40-minute window, a Saturday shopper into the city. All of them could order one and feel the day had been a small occasion. The watercress trade was supplied by a handful of farms, and as those farms shrank, the sandwich shrank with them. The tea sandwich tradition is mostly gone now, and watercress with butter went with it. Hardtack and water is not really something you can say this about. Hardtack and water was literally something people only ate in the worst of times when they had absolutely nothing else to work with. A simple cracker-like biscuit made of flour and water was one of the most common foods in America for around 2 entire centuries. It saw so many different eras, events, and wars. People associated it with famine, regular inflation spikes, Civil War rationing, the Depression, and so much more. Seafaring traders would keep a steady stock of hardtack, and it was actually even more important for them. This is because next to cockroaches, diamonds, and titanium, hardtack might be the most indestructible thing on the planet. When the thing is stored properly, it literally can stay good for years without spoiling, and this is something that you'd usually expect of food that's been put through preservatives. Plus, the economical benefit was unmatched. With just some flour, water, and salt, hardtack was one of the easiest things to make at home. Also, one of the most boring things. Number 15. Chicken a la king in a pastry shell. This was the white tablecloth dish that lunch counters dressed up for ladies who came in from the department store upstairs. Diced, cooked chicken simmered in a cream sauce with sliced mushrooms, pimentos, and green peas, ladled into a baked puff pastry vol au vent the size of a teacup. A sprinkle of paprika on top for color. Schrafft's served this through 1972 in their Midtown locations. The dish was a Schrafft's signature, and when Pet Incorporated bought the chain in 1967, they tried to modernize the menu and quietly stopped pre-baking the pastry shells. After the shells went, the dish became just chicken and cream sauce on toast, and it lost the only thing that made it special. By 1980, the last of the Schrafft's locations had closed, and the pastry shell had no other counter to live in. Number 23, Salisbury steak with brown gravy. The patty was beef and breadcrumb, shaped in a press and frozen flat, then baked from frozen for 40 minutes in a deep hotel pan. The gravy came from a sealed pouch of mushroom and onion base, mixed with hot water and stirred with a wooden paddle long enough to coat the back of a ladle. Cafeteria recipes from the 1988 USDA quantity cookbook called for 1 pound of meat to feed 5 kids, which made Salisbury steak the cheapest hot entree on the line. You either loved it or refused to eat it, and the lunch ladies could tell by 3rd grade which side of that line you were on. The patty went on mashed potatoes with green beans alongside, the gravy ladled across both. By the time the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act took effect in 2012, Salisbury steak carried more sodium than the new rules allowed. The wooden paddles went into storage. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. You hear the name. So, what if you wanted to enjoy the finer side of things? Take it up a notch. Make dinner something fancy. Back in the 1920s, apparently, the best way to do that was to treat yourself to some shrimp in ramekins. Shrimp is something you sometimes associate with fine dining, but it's usually accompanied by something else or being backed up by a lot of side pieces to make it stand out. If you take a dive into French cuisine, though, you'll find out that they have a pretty different take on shrimp and some pretty extravagant methods of cooking it. As always with French dishes, the sauce is as much the star as the main ingredient, and in this case, the dish would always use Newburgh sauce, which was based off of classic French bechamel and velouté sauces. By the 1900s, pretty much all shrimp in ramekins were made using this specific format. These French cooking techniques were spread heavily throughout the 1920s by renowned chefs such as Escoffier, and they pretty much laid the roots for a lot of what we have nowadays too. It was actually dishes like chop suey that paved the way for this kind of exploration into foreign cuisines, interestingly enough. Anyway, that's a lot of backstory. Let's talk a bit about the thing itself. Typically, you can expect your shrimp in ramekins to look like sautéed shrimp in a pretty decadent and thick sauce, very heavy on the seasoning, by the way. Your typical ingredients would be stuff like sherry or paprika and egg yolks. You take that, some buttered ramekins and cheese and get it baking real good, and then you have yourself shrimp in ramekins. It was pretty much something you'd get in expensive French restaurants back in the 1920s, so it was like the perfect thing to get on a date or some kind of other memorable day. You could also just make an exciting little day out of trying multi-course meals and come across this since it was pretty common back then to serve it as an entree. Honestly, a lot of French dishes and cooking styles would make their mark later on, but if you really look back at the things that made it possible, it was dishes like this. Simple enough, but it was one of the best things to get throughout the entire decade, though it was a bit reserved for the upper class. That meant that it escaped a lot of the bigger crowd that would usually get their grub at more reasonable places, but it was never aiming to be that kind of dish anyway. It got a lot of spotlight in women's cookbooks and magazines too, especially those that would specifically be centered around party menus. Ever want to impress a guest at your next dinner party? Maybe you can try out this 1920s classic and impress everyone with a twist on shrimp they've never had before. I mean, if it worked for them, all the way back when it was pretty trendy and popular to serve this, it'll definitely work now that everyone's moved on from it and doesn't really remember. So far, we got some killer products from the likes of General Mills, and you'd be sorely wrong if you missed other Titanic names like Nabisco, which came up with their own bite-sized snacks which did massive numbers. They were known as Toastettes, and they were like these Pop-Tart toaster pastries that were a pretty famous competitor for Kellogg's own food lines aimed at children. These Toastettes would usually have berry-based fillings, which also made them more popular whenever one of those like strawberries or blueberries were in season. They also had apple cinnamon, and the Toasty itself was like a sandwich with these fillings with optional frosting if you wanted to go for it. You know how McDonald's intends you to eat its fries and its sundae separately? Well, Toastettes are supposed to be toasted right as you get them, but a lot of kids enjoyed skipping that part and just treating it like a dessert. Plus, the fact that they would remain cold in metal containers meant that they had a pretty long and refreshing shelf life, and that made them ideal for hotter states like Arizona and California. Toastettes were also packaged in a way that made them super easy to grab on the go. Kids could stuff them in their lunchboxes, backpacks, or even their pockets, making them the ultimate in portable snacks. And since they were more filling than regular cookies or crackers, they felt like a mini meal rather than just a sugary treat. Some parents even felt they were healthier than other options, with their fruit-based fillings and pastry shell, which made them seem a bit closer to real food. In pretty much exactly the same vein, you had brown bread and baked beans. Look, no matter how bad things get, you really can't change human nature. People need to switch things up, or before starvation and poverty take them, boredom and monotony will. One of the best ways to keep things fresh in the household was to just switch out the potatoes and onions for some baked beans. You had your typical beans, the same ones people were eating with cornbread, but they'd just be baked instead. This would give them a warm, toasty feeling, and you can definitely already guess how that came in clutch during wintertime. Oh yeah, winters during the Dust Bowl were a vivid scene out of hell. Those winds were sharp and cold enough to split your bones, but holding on to some sense of comfort thanks to your bowl of baked beans and bread was a little joy that pushed people far enough into the new year and eventually the next season. Number 20. Slinger. If you did not grow up in St. Louis, you have probably never heard of this one. A pile of hash browns topped with 2 eggs, a hamburger patty, a ladle of chili, and a fistful of shredded cheese. Some counters threw diced raw onions on top for good measure. The whole thing arrived on an oval plate and weighed close to 2 pounds. It was the late-night meal of factory workers, cab drivers, and anyone leaving a bar at 2 in the morning. The diners along South Grand Avenue served them around the clock. A slinger required a cook who didn't mind the mess and a customer who didn't count calories. Fast food never even attempted it. What fast food actually replaced was not a type of food. It was a way of being fed. At a lunch counter, someone stood 3 feet away from you and cooked your meal while you watched. You saw the butter go into the pan. You heard the onions hit the griddle. The cook adjusted your order without you having to ask. Extra pickle? She already knew. When the chains moved the kitchen behind a wall and the customer behind a steering wheel, they didn't just change the menu. They removed the relationship. The meals on this list didn't disappear because people stopped wanting them. They disappeared because the places that served them required a human being behind the counter who remembered your name. That person cost more than a microwave. Vienna sausages and saltines were not a meal. They were a dare. Tiny pink tubes floating in mystery juice, packed into a can that hissed when you opened it, like it knew it was about to be judged. You would drain them, maybe pat them dry, and line them up like little soldiers on a stack of saltines. No heat, no fuss, just raw, salty commitment. The crackers softened under the weight of the sausages, sometimes crumbling entirely. But you powered through because this was your lunch, and if you were lucky, there was mustard. Not fancy mustard. Yellow squeeze bottle stuff that cut through the meat-flavored monotony. It was not gourmet, it was survival. A lunch built for kids who knew how to eat without complaining. And maybe, just maybe, you started to like it. Maybe the weirdness became comforting. like knowing you could always count on something so unapologetically odd to be waiting in your lunchbox. Kids today would never touch them. But back then, they were a rite of passage. Potatoes weren't the only option. They were great, but not the only ones. On days when people would naturally get too tired of eating potatoes, they would always go for things like baked bean sandwiches. This was a filling, no-fuss meal that was especially loved by working-class homes that were doing labor-intensive work. They were very common in the Northeast, the Midwest, and different parts of the South, especially where any kind of construction was going on. It was also really helpful that so many brands had come out with such accessible and easy canned beans. These were cheap, required no effort to cook, and the result was something you could use in a soup, a sandwich, or a casserole. It just depended on what you were feeling that day. Either way, you were going to get a delicious meal. One of the biggest reasons I think this was as popular as it was is because people really began to rely on it during the Great Depression. Another good reason is that this was the perfect lunch for your kids, and it was so low effort that making it wasn't a hassle at all. Vinegar pie slices were a forgotten miracle of thrift. Bright, tangy, and sweet all at once. When lemons were scarce and fresh fruit out of reach, mountain cooks made do with vinegar, sugar, and eggs to create something that tasted every bit as fine. The filling baked into a glossy custard with a soft, buttery crust that held its shape even in the summer heat. It needed no refrigeration, no fancy ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Wrapped in wax paper or newspaper, slices went into lunch pails beside coffee jars and biscuits. The first bite was sharp and surprising, but by the second, the vinegar's sting mellowed into a warm, caramel-like sweetness. It was a pie that aged gracefully, growing richer over time, a small reward for those who worked hard and wasted nothing. It became a staple of mountain kitchens, a quiet symbol of resourceful living. What began as imitation lemon pie turned into something uniquely its own, humble yet elegant in its simplicity. Vinegar pie proved that flavor could come from imagination, not luxury, and that even in lean years, sweetness could still find its way to the table and make life a little softer. Peanut butter and raisin sandwiches were a practical and slightly playful lunchbox option in 1950s households, made by spreading peanut butter across bread and sprinkling raisins on top. Children loved the chewy sweetness of raisins mixed with creamy peanut butter, a pairing that felt like a treat even though it was inexpensive. Parents liked it because it required no cooking and delivered protein along with natural sugars. When raisins were added to peanut butter spread on celery sticks, the snack was nicknamed ants on a log, but on bread, it became a filling lunch. The sandwich was simple enough for children to make themselves, adding to its popularity as a staple of after-school snacks. Raisins stored well in the pantry and were cheaper than jams or jellies, making them a thrifty choice. The peanut butter and raisin sandwich carried the same spirit of ingenuity seen across 1950s kitchens, where stretching simple staples created memorable meals. For those who grew up with it, the taste still sparks nostalgia for school lunch tables and childhood afternoons. Vienna sausages and crackers served as the self-contained lunch that required no cooking, no refrigeration, and no cleanup beyond disposing of the can. Those small, soft sausages packed in briny liquid provided ready-to-eat protein that seniors living alone could access whenever hunger struck. A can cost roughly 15 cents and contained enough sausages to pair with crackers for a complete, if modest, midday meal. The sausages had a mild flavor and tender texture that some found comforting while others tolerated as practical sustenance. Eaten straight from the can with crackers, this lunch could be assembled in under 10 minutes without dirtying pots or pans. For elderly folks on fixed incomes, Vienna sausages represented protein that lasted indefinitely and required nothing beyond opening the can. Some included mustard for dipping, but many ate them plain. The lunch carried associations with simple times when elaborate preparation seemed unnecessary. Vienna sausages have largely disappeared from consideration as proper lunch fare. The egg and cress sandwich is literally so perfect yet basic that it makes no sense this dish ever faded into the sidelines. Hard-boiled eggs get chopped up and mixed with mayonnaise or butter before they're topped with a generous serving of cress between 2 slices of soft white bread. This is an egg salad if I've ever heard of one, and the creamy richness of it combined with the peppery crust makes for a refreshing, zingy bite that really knocks you into the present moment. Egg and cress sandwiches are something you would consider British, right? Just off of the vibes? You'd be smart to assume that. This sandwich was a really popular choice in the middle of the 20th century, especially because after World War II, rationing might have eased up. But that doesn't mean that meat became widely available overnight. These days, egg and cress sandwiches are just a retro memory, but they used to be the ideal lunch to take to work or school. Cornbread and Number 23, olive nut on white toast. Stirring cream cheese soft with the back of a fork was how the recipe started. Chopped green olives with the pimento still in them, and toasted black walnuts, all folded until the mixture turned pale yellow, flecked with red and brown. Spread on white toast and cut diagonally. The sandwich showed up in every Better Homes and Gardens cookbook for 15 years and then quietly disappeared. Cream cheese moved on to bagels. Olives moved on to martinis. The black walnuts went the hardest because nobody was harvesting them anymore. The olive nut was simple and beautiful in an odd way, like a tea party leftover that the working world had borrowed for an hour. Now you can go a year of eating in restaurants and never once see one on a plate. Cabbage and noodles were one of the most affordable vegetable-based dishes you could get for yourself. The best thing about cabbages were the way they were available year-round, and let me just put things into perspective for you. Back then, the seasonal nature of things was something that was instrumental to how people planned out their budgets, their groceries, and what they were going to be eating that week. You may also think that without refrigeration, noodles wouldn't really be sustainable, but people would simply make the noodles from scratch when they needed it. Hard work, I know, but at least you didn't need a lot of the stuff. A simple head of cabbage, 1 bag of noodles that was enough to feed a family of up to 4 and 5, and it was an incredibly popular thing in cities, though there may have been some cultural gaps in preferences. In the South, it never really caught on the same way. It's definitely quite a refreshing dish, though. Now this one might really take you for a bit of a doozy. Number 20. The tuna melt on rye. 2 slices of dark rye laid open on the flat grill. Tuna salad spooned onto 1/2, a slice of American cheese laid on top, a slice of tomato sometimes, and the whole thing pressed flat under a heavy steel bacon weight while the bottom turned mahogany brown. The cheese ran down the sides and stuck to the grill in little crisp, lacy bits that the cook scraped up with a spatula and tucked back onto the plate. Drugstore counters loved this sandwich because it used up tuna salad that had been sitting in the case since breakfast. The tuna melt left lunch counters when the flat grill left lunch counters. A panini press cannot make the cheese skirts. A microwave makes the bread go limp. The melt only works on a seasoned griddle with a weight, and nobody has the space for that anymore. Number 14. The peanut butter bar with chocolate frosting. The bar was one of the most beautiful objects a 1980s cafeteria ever produced, and every child knew it. The recipe lived on a single index card in the lunch lady's binder. 1 pound of butter, 3 cups of peanut butter, 4 cups of powdered sugar, 6 cups of graham cracker crumbs, all mixed by hand in a stainless bowl the size of a baby bath. The mixture was pressed into a half-sheet pan, 1/2 inch thick, then topped with melted milk chocolate and butter, smoothed flat with the back of a long spatula, and chilled in the walk-in for 2 hours. The lunch lady cut it into 36 perfect rectangles with a knife dipped in hot water between every cut. A single bar weighed nearly 3 ounces and tasted like a Reese's cup pressed into a brick. Kids traded their orange wedges, their carrots, their entire entree for an extra peanut butter bar. A second grader in Akron once kept hers in your lunchbox for 3 days and rationed it in pencil eraser-sized bites because she did not believe she would ever taste anything that good again. The peanut butter bar appeared on the 4-week rotation exactly twice a month, and on the morning the bar was on your menu, attendance in some elementary schools rose by 7%. Older lunch ladies were said to bake an extra pan and tuck it into the warming oven for the teachers, because the teachers traded for them too. The bar had everything a 1980s child wanted in a single object. It was sweet, it was rich, it was salty under the chocolate, and it filled a small hand. And then in 2014, the new federal Smart Snacks rule capped your dessert serving at 200 kilocalories and limited the sugar to 35% of total weight. The peanut butter bar carried 460 kilocalories and well over half its weight in sugar. It was pulled from cafeteria lines in most American districts within 18 months. The recipe survives only in church cookbooks and in PTA fundraisers, and in the memories of the kids who walked past the dessert window in 1986 and saw the chocolate gleaming under the lights like a window in a candy store. Pop Rocks actually hit the shelves somewhere around the mid of the 1970s, and these were just a super hit from the get-go. They were these small pieces of carbonated candy, and they made a very fizzy popping sensation when kids ate them, and that made them a novelty. It is said that when a kid would discover a Pop Rock, they would experience the same euphoria of a promotion at work. These were also really popular among the playground, as kids would always be enjoying Pop Rocks while playing around with their friends in the sand. It's the little things like that which really add to the whole aspect of making it aimed for kids, you know? They enrich those little daily experiences that make up everything a child needs to have. Plus, despite these being candy, they didn't really even need any kind of refrigeration. They just needed to be packed properly, and kids could even show them off because at first they were a little pricey and rare, so it was like being the cool kid when you decided to bring them to school. Cornmeal mush with gravy was one of the best things families living in the Great Plains could hope for. The gravy wasn't just something they threw in for the sake of it, to fill themselves up. It actually added a lot and made the cornmeal significantly better. It really brought out the flavor that was already there, and getting your money's worth was never really an issue with this dish. Cornmeal was something that was so regional that a lot of families just ended up growing up on it exclusively. It was pretty hard to get an affordable meal for yourself back then, but things like this made it just a bit easier to manage. You could even buy cornmeal from your local stores for barely a few cents a pound. So that made it even easier for people living in urban areas and hubs to get it. One of the best advantages of cornmeal was that you didn't have to have an oven or a stove to make something of it. You could just as easily do it over an open fire too. This mush, for example, was something most people made without any kind of kitchen appliances. 24. Salmon croquettes. A can of pink salmon drained and mixed with crushed saltine crackers, an egg, and diced onion, shaped into small patties and fried golden brown. Tartar sauce on the side. Lemon wedge if the counter was fancy. This was the fish meal of the inland lunch counter, hundreds of miles from any ocean, and it showed up on Fridays in Catholic towns across the Midwest without fail. The canned salmon made it affordable. The crackers made it stretch. When frozen fish sticks took over school cafeterias and fast food menus in the 1970s, the humble croquette lost its spot on the board. Nobody protested. It just slid off the chalkboard one Friday and never came back. Hot dog pie was what happened when dinner and lunch collided in the middle of a very questionable casserole dish. It was part mystery, part meat, and all nostalgia. Imagine cutting into a pie crust expecting apples and finding chopped up hot dogs swimming in a sea of onion, ketchup, and maybe a few rogue vegetables. It should have been horrifying, but to kids in the 1970s, it was a warm hug from a world that did not know what cholesterol was. Moms made it when they had too many leftovers and no energy. Dads ate it like it was steak. And kids? Kids bragged about having it cold in their lunchboxes the next day. It was savory, sloppy, and full of heart. Not culinary heart, just the metaphorical kind. Every forkful was a gamble. Would you hit more meat or more mush? Did it matter? Probably not. All that mattered was that it felt homemade. It felt like someone tried. Even if that someone was making dinner out of the last 5 hot dogs, a can of cream of mushroom soup, and a dream. Today, it sounds like a fever dream. Back then, it was a Tuesday. For families with little more than pantry staples, stretching a meal was an art form. Tomato gravy. Over rice was a perfect example of how a handful of cheap ingredients could be turned into something warm, filling, and, on the right day, even delicious. Rice was affordable. easy to store, and could be cooked in large batches, making it a go-to base for struggling households. The tomato gravy itself was a simple mix of canned or fresh tomatoes, flour for thickening, and a little fat, usually bacon grease or lard, to give it depth. Some versions were smooth, others chunky, depending on what was on hand. When money was especially tight, even just tomato juice and water could create a thinner, more soup-like version. This dish had roots in the South, where tomato gravy was often served over biscuits. But during the Depression, rice became a common substitute since it was cheaper and stretched further. Leftovers weren't wasted either. Extra gravy could be poured over cornbread or mixed into the next day's meal. It was proof that a little creativity could turn a sparse pantry into a meal that still felt like home. Loved that. Pinto bean patties turned humble leftovers into something hearty enough to carry through a day's labor. When supper's beans cooled on the stove, the next morning they would be mashed, mixed with cornmeal or flour, and fried into small cakes. Crisp on the outside, soft inside, they held together just enough to slide between slices of bread for an easy sandwich. Cold or warm, it did not matter. They tasted like thrift and care, proof that nothing in a hillbilly kitchen ever went to waste. You could spice them if you had the means, but even plain, they had a comfort all their own. Some said the flavor deepened overnight, as if the beans remembered the smoke from last night's fire. These patties were food for people who understood how to make plenty out of scraps, and they did it with pride. A jar of pickles on the side turned it into a full meal, simple but whole, just like the folks who made it. Cold spaghetti sandwiches were a frugal trick that turned dinner leftovers into portable lunches. Housewives discovered that leftover spaghetti, often dressed in tomato sauce, could be pressed between slices of bread and sent to school or work the next day. It was unusual but practical, using what was already available rather than wasting food. Children sometimes looked at it with skepticism, but once they tasted the chewy noodles inside soft bread, it became another familiar memory of mid-century kitchens. Adults valued it because it required no cooking and stretched the grocery budget. In immigrant households, particularly Italian-American ones, this sandwich was an easy way to enjoy pasta outside of dinner time. It reflected the wider American habit of repurposing food creatively during the 1950s, when frugality and efficiency still shaped daily cooking. For many families, the cold spaghetti sandwich was a symbol of practicality, reminding them that no meal was ever wasted. It may seem odd today, but it carried families through. Canned salmon patties transformed affordable pantry protein into crispy, satisfying lunch fare that seniors could prepare in small batches. A single can of pink salmon, costing roughly 30 cents, provided enough fish for several patties when mixed with crushed crackers, egg, and minced onion. The mixture was shaped into rounds and fried in oil until golden brown on both sides. For seniors living alone, salmon patties offered the advantage of being made fresh in whatever quantity was needed, since the canned fish kept indefinitely. 2 patties served between bread or alongside vegetables made a complete lunch, providing protein and satisfaction. The recipe required no precise measurements and forgave substitutions, making it accessible for those who rarely cooked elaborate meals. Many seniors learned to make these patties during the Depression and carried the habit into retirement. The soft bones in canned salmon provided valuable calcium. Though canned salmon still fills shelves, the art of patty making has largely disappeared. Pickled egg and bread is one of those old-school snacks that kind of raises an eyebrow when you first hear about it, but once you try it, you actually end up firmly seated on the bandwagon. It's exactly what the description on the tin says too. It's a pickled egg, usually drowning in vinegar and different kinds of tangy complementary spices, with a slice of plain buttered bread or a soft roll. No fancy layering, no Worcestershire sauce or anything, just the classic sharp punch of a pickle, balanced by the familiar, comforting tastes of egg and bread. Flavor-wise, this is a full-on vibe. The egg has a really nice texture that goes wonderfully with the pickles, and the acidic kick from the pickled brine really helps to contrast with the richness of the yolk of the egg. You take that, mix in some warm buttered bread, and you get yourself a meal that's the whole package. Creamy, soft, chewy, sharp, tangy, and whatever other flavor profile you can guess in your head. Pickled eggs are actually something that you'd find in New England more than anywhere else in America, but they've always been something of a working-class classic. Number 21. Banana mayonnaise on white. The first bite tasted wrong and right in the same instant. Sweet banana, salty mayonnaise, soft white bread. The mayonnaise was Duke's. The bananas were green-tipped, sliced thin, laid in a single overlapping layer. A sprinkle of salted peanuts on top when the jar held some. The sandwich was a Southern staple long before the Depression, like so many of the things this country eats without questioning. The bread was buttered on the outside on hot days to keep the slices from going slimy. The lunch counters that served it widely are gone now. The sandwich is still eaten in pockets across the Deep South. Most never try it. They are missing something honest. Grits and butter were a foundational meal for a lot of different kinds of poor families, but this was particularly true for anybody living in the South. This was even more true for black sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Working-class white families survived most of the 19th and 20th centuries off of foods like this too, but it really cemented itself as a staple of the black community back then. Corn was one of the most widely grown crops in the South, and grits, which were just ground hominy and cornmeal, were a very nice byproduct. Plus, back then, people lived and died by the waste absolutely nothing mentality. They would not let any byproduct go to waste because why should they? It was something they could get in bulk for literally a few pennies. Plus, just like rice and potatoes, grits provided an incredible amount of stamina and energy. Laborers often were also poor and did not have the money to really buy elaborate rations or pick and choose their nutrition, so starchy, fibrous foods were their best friends. Number 22. Chicken croquettes with cream gravy. These were the leftover Chicken Monday special at every drugstore counter from Lancaster to Little Rock. Ground cooked chicken bound with thick white sauce, shaped into cones or pyramids, rolled in cracker crumbs, and deep fried until the outside crackled. Served to a plate over mashed potatoes with a pool of pale cream gravy and a side of peas. The trick was the binder. The white sauce had to be cold and stiff enough to hold the shape through the fryer. Hinkle's in Lancaster County is still making them from a recipe that has not changed since the 60s. Nobody else is. Croquettes died because frying twice-cooked chicken takes more labor than the modern profit margin allows. 2 minutes of hand-shaping proportion does not survive contact with a chain franchise spreadsheet. Number 17. Spaghetti with meat sauce. The pasta came in 20-pound bags of dry strands, boiled in a 30-gallon kettle until a piece thrown at the wall stuck for 1 second and slid off. Kids who walked past the kitchen at 10 in the morning could smell the simmering tomato and oregano halfway down your hallway. The sauce was ground beef, canned tomato puree, garlic powder, oregano, and a pinch of sugar. A wire scoop fished portions of pasta out of the kettle, like a net pulling shells from surf, and a 6-ounce ladle dropped sauce on top. The serving line moved fast on spaghetti day. Kids with braces dreaded it and ate the garlic bread first. Sister Joan in a Pittsburgh Catholic school served the same plate every Tuesday for 19 years, with a sprinkle of dried parsley, because she said it made the sauce look fresher. The 2012 standards limited white pasta to 1 serving a week per child, and the recipe disappeared from most menus. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. So, pepper-crusted tuna was actually something that took a lot of inspiration from Japanese cooking. I know that's one we don't hear about too often besides chicken katsu curries and ramen bowls, but it is a pretty good one to take inspo from. In particular, there's this one Japanese dish I want to reference, which I'm pretty sure is the inspiration for pepper-crusted tuna. This is known as tataki, and it involves a pretty light and generous sear over some real high heat, and then the fish is served raw on the inside. Don't look at me. These are the same people that came up with sushi. The minimalist preparation really does match up well with Japanese cooking, though. Of course, there weren't any kinds of things like peppercorns serving as a crust or lots of spices and herbs. The pepper crusting aspect was entirely Western, but it does bring me to an interesting topic. See, the thing here is that in the 1980s and 1990s, people apparently really started to get into fusion food. I think the seeds for it had been sown a long while ago thanks to all the mock food that was coming out in the war, which was showing people all kinds of new flavors with ingredients they had never given a second glance to. Plus, it helped that sushi was also already growing steadily. People were realizing they had a bit more room to play with when it came to serving raw fish, thanks to that. Pepper-crusted tuna was left raw on the inside, but the crust was really something to behold. It made the dish so much more flavorful than it originally was. Don't get me wrong, some people definitely had their issues with it, mostly traditionalists who thought that Americans were disrespecting the dish, but overall, a lot of people responded pretty positively to the recipe. Also, do you remember how I said that America hasn't really developed its habit of greener, leaner eating? Well, by the 1990s, that was in full swing. See, before this, the past decades were marked by an explosion in fast food and convenience culture, which basically meant that people were eating worse than ever before. There was a nationwide sentiment growing mostly from concerned parents about returning to more organic and natural food. Tuna, being a lean protein that's loaded with omega-3 fatty acids, fit like a glove. It was visually pretty appealing. You had the crimson red of the tuna with the dark, smoky pepper crust. It also tasted extremely good, and it was healthy. Tuna wasn't exactly a 5-star protein, so it wasn't too expensive to get, unlike sushi, which was sometimes out of the price range of people. All in all, this dish did most things right. It had style, it was accessible, and it was new while still being familiar enough. Nabisco Snackmate cheese was this line of processed cheese spreads that came in a bit of an unconventional packaging, which was pressurized cans. They were supposed to be enjoyed as an after-school snack, and they were a lunchbox edition. Kids could usually take it along as a spread and put it on top of whatever their actual meal was in the lunchbox, like crackers with mate cheese spread all over them. Parents would often send their children with breadsticks or give them other kinds of foods like pita breads that you could spread the cheese on, and honestly, it worked pretty well. If you got a hot dog and some Snackmate cheese, then you could consider yourself the luckiest person alive. The cheese spread was incredibly popular. It was a little messy, but that made it even more enticing because it gave off that gooey, melted cheese vibe that a lot of cheese products would desperately aim for. Snackmate had a lot of portability too, since it was one of the first pre-packed cheese snacks to do it. Either way, this had all the support it needed to end up being a market favorite. You already know what the deal is with potatoes. Besides just that, though, you might be surprised to know people really cozied up to cabbage. It only makes sense for cabbage and potato stew to be such a popular combination then. Why did this happen? How did it happen? Well, they just had chemistry, for lack of a better word. Cabbages were just as easy to grow as potatoes were, and they cost around the exact same, namely just 5 to 10 cents. You gotta understand one thing about living in times like this too. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, was eating for pleasure. People had two approaches to food during the entire Dust Bowl era. One was that you had to eat things that were filling because it would save costs. The other was that you had to eat things that would keep you healthy and free of sickness because it would save costs. By now, I think the entire national poverty aspect of all of this might really start to sink in. Either way, cabbage and potato stew was adept at satisfying both of those needs, so it only made sense that people made it such a regular meal at their tables. Number 26. Ham steak with red-eye gravy. A thick round of country ham seared in a cast-iron skillet until the fat rendered out. and then black coffee poured right into the hot pan. That was the gravy. Coffee and ham drippings, nothing else. It came with 2 eggs and a biscuit or a side of grits, depending on where you sat down. In the rural South, this was a breakfast counter meal that could carry you through a full day of work in the field. The coffee cut through the salt of the ham in a way no cream gravy ever could. Fast food breakfast menus replaced it with a ham biscuit wrapped in foil, and something essential got lost in that translation. The lunch counter was never just about food, it was a place. You sat elbow to elbow with strangers on round vinyl stools that spun, and somebody behind the counter knew whether you took your coffee black. The formica was always wiped clean. The glass pie case always had something in it. There was no menu board with backlit photographs of meals. There was a chalkboard, or a printed card tucked behind the napkin holder, or the cook just told you what was good today. When McDonald's opened its first 100 locations in the late 1950s, nobody thought the lunch counter was in danger. By 1975, half of them were gone. By 1990, the ones that remained were relics. The food survived in memory. The place did not. Creamed chipped beef on toast, also known as stuff on a shingle, was a meal built in the trenches that somehow ended up in American cafeterias. It started in the military, a way to stretch dried beef into something resembling sustenance. The beef was salty, thin, and usually shredded beyond recognition. The sauce? A thick white gravy made from flour, milk, and determination. It was poured generously over toast, biscuits, or anything else that could act as a sponge. In school lunches, it arrived in lukewarm plastic trays, never quite hot, never quite cold. Kids either loved it or dreaded it. There was no in-between. It was filling, fast, and had that unmistakable cafeteria smell that followed you into math class. Some parents made it at home, calling it comfort food. Others never touched it again after leaving the service. But for a generation of kids, it was just lunch. A strange, salty, beige experience that somehow stuck around long enough to be missed. So, squash might not be our top pick on a regular day, but Grandma's squash casserole was so irresistible that we found ourselves going back for seconds, or even thirds. This casserole was a staple in Southern cuisine and was Graham's favorite way of sneaking nutrients into our dinner. Squash is rich in vitamins A and C, potassium and fiber, making it a wholesome choice. Now, this dish was typically famous in the summer when squash was available in abundance, but you could freeze the veggie and enjoy it all year round too. Squash casserole was highly customizable, meaning Graham could tweak it by adding cooked bacon, sausage, or even fresh herbs. The secret ingredient that gave this bad boy its unique taste was a dash of hot sauce, so next time you attempt making this dish for a potluck, don't forget the key ingredient. Thank me later! Hoe cake cornbread was humble food with the weight of generations behind it. Mixed from cornmeal, salt, and water, it was poured thin into a skillet or, long ago, onto the flat of a hoe blade held over an open fire. It crisped at the edges and stayed tender in the middle, strong enough to hold beans, greens, or slices of salt pork. Each cake was both meal and utensil, eaten with calloused fingers and quiet gratitude. Hoe cake cornbread carried the flavor of smoke and history, of families who worked from dawn to dark and gave thanks for even the smallest blessings. It was simple food, but never small in meaning, a recipe that traveled through generations, feeding hearts as much as stomachs. Polk's chicken and rice soup was another lunchtime favorite of the 1950s, often coming from a can but still delivering comfort and warmth. Housewives kept shelves lined with soups because they were quick, dependable, and inexpensive, and chicken and rice was one of the most beloved varieties. It offered a lighter alternative to heavier meat dishes while still feeling nourishing. Crackers or bread often accompanied it, stretching the meal further. Children appreciated the mild flavor, while adults liked that it was easy to digest and filling enough for a midday meal. The convenience of canned soups matched the growing culture of quick cooking, where less time was spent in the kitchen but meals still needed to be hearty. Advertisements of the era leaned heavily on the promise of wholesome family meals in minutes, and chicken and rice soup was the perfect example. For countless families, a bowl of this soup represented comfort, frugality, and the reassuring taste of something simple. It remains a reminder of how mid-century America embraced both tradition and convenience. Sardines on toast carried an honest simplicity that seniors living alone appreciated for both nutrition and economy. A small tin of sardines, often purchased for less than 20 cents, provided complete protein and enough substance for a satisfying midday meal. The preparation required nothing more than opening the can, arranging the fish on buttered toast, and adding perhaps a squeeze of lemon juice. The sardines came packed in oil, tomato sauce, or mustard, each variety offering different flavor profiles for minimal cost. Many seniors kept tins stacked in their pantries, knowing this lunch could be assembled in under 5 minutes without heating anything beyond the toast. The fish's salty richness paired perfectly with soft white bread, creating a combination that filled the stomach without elaborate cooking. For those watching pennies stretch across fixed incomes, sardines represented remarkable value. This humble lunch reminded many of simpler times when canned fish was considered perfectly respectable fare. Stew in a thermos is really a classic. This is something that combines a lot of different things to make a unique meal that you wouldn't think of on your own. A thermos is something you usually use for drinks. It doesn't always have to be water, but stews in there? Not really anyone's first thought. For those who need a warm meal right on the go, though, this was the most reliable thing in the world, especially when you would be working in the winter. Thick and tender chunks of meat mixed in with roto vegetables like carrots and potatoes and simmered in a rich and flavorful broth that gets thickened up even more with some flour and cornstarch. I mean, what's not to like? The flavor oozes out of that thermos as soon as you open it is next level. Stew in a thermos was a game changer for workers during the 50s and 60s. It didn't matter what your job was, whether you were a truck driver, worked a night shift in a factory, or ran numbers behind a desk. Even kids in school would take it along with them. The thermos lets you pack a hearty and warm meal that could pretty much survive hours inside the bottle without losing its essence. You had to have some trial and error here first, though, because most people would often make the stew too liquidy on their first try or two, and it would end up spilling over once you unscrewed the lid. Thermos-steeped stew became something of a regional favorite in northern areas where the temperature was really known to drop, and I think it's a cute little dish we could bring back today too. Number 15. Sloppy Joe Manhattan Style. The Sloppy Joe you remember from a school cafeteria tray was not the original. The original was a triple-decker deli sandwich invented at the Town Hall Deli in South Orange, New Jersey in the early 1930s and adopted by Manhattan lunch counters by 1948. 3 slices of seeded rye, 2 layers of thinly sliced corned beef and Swiss, a layer of coleslaw, and a coat of Russian dressing between the layers. The whole sandwich was cut into quarters and pinned with toothpicks like a small flag held the thing together. You could eat one in 5 minutes and walk back to the office full. The deli claimed the recipe came home from a politician's vacation in Havana, where the bartender at a place called Sloppy Joe's served something similar with rum on the side. The story is more legend than history at this point, but the deli still tells it on the wall. The loose meat ground beef version came later out of Sioux City, Iowa, and took over the name by the late 40s. Articles about the cafeteria tray version were everywhere by 1957. One thing I noticed reading old menus is that the Manhattan version was always called Sloppy Joe with a capital, never Sloppy Joe lowercase, as if the name was a proper restaurant title. Most Americans today have no idea there were 2 completely different sandwiches called the same thing. The Manhattan one was better. Onion sandwiches are not really hard to understand. They're simple, inexpensive meals that were common among many poor Americans. Plus, there's no secret here. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's just raw onion sliced into thin shapes placed between 2 slices of bread. At most, people would add in whatever butter, salt, or pepper they could spare, and it was something that was favored by people who really wanted an easy-to-prepare meal. Onions also had the benefit of being some of the cheapest vegetables available in the entire market. They also were great for storage, which means that they were able to be bought in bulk without you worrying about them going bad. Bread was also something that people always had in stock, and many families would be relying on meals like this to get by. If they could not afford to buy their own bread, a lot of people would make their own bread or purchase day-old loaves at a discounted price. Onions weren't ever something expensive, but people could also grow them, and many who lived on the outskirts of urban cities and communities did this. They were also a common crop even within these communities because people had their own home gardens. Despite the simplicity, though, the onion sandwich was a knockout. It could really fill you up. The meals we've had so far are really cheap, make-do food, but they still are a proper meal. Number 24. The Cherry Coke Phosphate. This was the drink the soda jerk made by hand, one glass at a time, with a tall fluted glass and a long-handled spoon. A pump of cherry syrup at the bottom, a small splash of acid phosphate from a brown apothecary bottle, then cola pulled from a tap, and seltzer hissed in on top. The phosphate gave it a sharp, tangy bite that grocery store cola never had. Drugstore counters used real cherry bark syrup at the start of the 70s. By 1978, the phosphate bottle had quietly disappeared from most fountains because the FDA tightened the rules on food-grade phosphoric acid and the bottled supplier stopped shipping to small counters. Without the phosphate, a cherry Coke is just a soda with syrup. Nobody calls that a phosphate anymore. 25. Tomato soup with a grilled cheese triangle. The soup came from a number 10 can of Campbell's condensed, thinned with whole milk in a steam kettle the size of a kitchen sink. The cheese was a half slice of American on white bread, grilled in butter on a flat top until your bread shattered when you bit into it. Lunch ladies cut every sandwich on the diagonal because the triangle dipped cleaner than the square. The ladle held 4 ounces, served into a 5-ounce bowl with a paper napkin folded under it. You dipped one corner, then another, and learned the order by 2nd grade. Today, the same lunch would fail 4 federal rules at once. Whole milk in the soup, white bread, butter on the griddle, and canned sodium together push past 740 milligrams. And whole grain bread now carries the sandwich. The original belongs to memory. General Tso's chicken is actually a pretty nice thing to visit if you want to get into more of what Chinese American cooking used to be like. So, despite how little it was displayed in its early years, it actually is a pretty strong element of Chinese American culture. The dish itself was named after a very renowned war general, Zhuo Zongtang, who was a Qing dynasty figure prominent around the Hunan province. He was also known as General Tso. At least, that's the only reference people can find for the name. The dish itself was arguably made by Peng Changkui, who was a chef that came from that very same province. Peng pretty much single-handedly made the recipe during his time as a banquet chef, and after China doubled down on communism, he fled to Taiwan. Apparently, that's where he first made the dish before he brought it on over to New York City around the 1970s. The dish itself takes a lot out of that region, though, since it's known mostly for its extreme uses of spices. Of course, eventually the recipe trickled down to American restaurants and lost a lot of that kick. Traditional Hunan Tso's chicken also didn't ever have any kind of sauce or any deep frying, so that was definitely something people in America made to make it more compatible with the taste buds that people were familiar with. The 1970s in particular had an extreme emphasis on Chinese American dining. There were all kinds of new restaurants opening up, and they were bringing in even more elements of Chinese culture that people hadn't seen before. American palates were pretty stuck in stone, though, and it was hard to get around them. That's why they introduced deep frying it with crispy fried chicken and a sweet sauce. It made the dish pretty crunchy and gave it a nice little look. The best part was that it used boneless thigh meat, so it was never an outrageously expensive dish. That allowed Chinese and purely American people alike to enjoy this new version of a Chinese classic. Pizza spins, on the other hand, were this snack that General Mills came up with in the 1960s. The idea here was to come up with a pizza that was also a snack. So let's think of this as like the grandfather of Lunchables, but this time they actually succeeded at what they were trying to do. They were this endearing mix of tomato, cheese, and spices that actually mimicked the pizza flavor quite well. It was supposed to be this spiral-shaped pizza, and it was definitely really popular for the kids. It was mess-free, easy to pack, flavorful, and affordable, making it a standout in the lunchbox category that parents couldn't resist giving their kids. Makes sense too. You get an instant version of a pizza, and even if it isn't the real thing, you'd be tempted to take it to school too. It's just how the world is. The kid that ends up bringing pizza to school always just does a bit better than the others. Even at a grade school level, politicking never stops. Speaking of quick and easy, so casseroles were definitely out of the question for most people. Yet a substitute that could fit into the picture was vegetable and noodle casseroles. Noodles were easy to make from scratch, and most people would even buy them in bulk because they hadn't suffered the worst of price hikes. That was reserved for things like good and common cuts of meat, which is part of why you'd never see your average, everyday casseroles on the table anymore. The best part of this dish was in two strengths that made it pretty much ideal for the Dust Bowl, though. Vegetable casseroles could be made with just about anything that people were growing in their victory gardens. Onions, olives, lettuces, and cabbages. If it's green and comes from the ground, you can put it in this casserole. Next, noodles were a filling thing to put in there too, because it kept your appetite down. Fiber, you know? Same reason gym bros are always telling you to eat oatmeal in the morning, it's like nature's Ozempic. The second strength this dish had was that it was really something you could make in bulk. I mean, once people got to making this, they could make it for more than just their family. Do you know how big of a deal that is? To actually have more than you need in a time like the 1930s? People saw the advantages to dishes like these and started making them for the entire community, often sharing ingredients and vegetables. It was actually pretty wholesome, if only it weren't in one of the worst times of the 20th century. Number 22. Denver sandwich. A Denver omelet folded between two slices of white bread, as common at lunch counters west of the Mississippi as the hamburger itself. Diced ham, green bell pepper, and onion cooked into beaten eggs, pressed flat on the griddle, and served with a pickle spear on the side. In Colorado and Wyoming, every counter had one. Some added cheese, some served it on toast instead of plain bread. You could eat it with one hand while reading the morning paper, and that simplicity was the whole point. Fast food chains tried and failed to turn the breakfast sandwich into something this satisfying. They settled for the Egg McMuffin instead. Olive loaf on rye was your mom's attempt at sophistication, whether you asked for it or not. It looked like bologna, until you noticed the green pimento-stuffed olives embedded like some kind of edible mosaic. The meat was pink, the olives were green, and the whole sandwich smelled like a deli had gotten lost in a thrift store. Rye bread made it even fancier, with its dense texture and sharp tang. But kids did not care about fancy. They cared about not getting laughed at, and bringing olive loaf to school was social suicide. Still, it had its defenders. Kids who genuinely liked the odd mix of salty meat and briny olives. Maybe they were ahead of their time. Maybe they just had weird taste buds. Either way, they stood by it. You could find olive loaf in plastic lunchboxes next to Capri Suns and string cheese. It held its own in a world of peanut butter and jelly. It was bold. It was unapologetic. And most of all, it was forgotten. Today, even deli counters hesitate to carry it. But back then, it was a declaration. My mom shops at the nice grocery store. Homemade fish sticks were a really easy dish to make at home. They were really popular in blue-collar households and rural farmsteads that either couldn't afford the back and forth to big cities to get hauls of frozen food, or just ones who preferred to make their own stuff. Even if the transport wasn't an issue, frozen food would outright just be more expensive than people could accept sometimes, especially things like Gorton's or Van de Kamp's. Families didn't really just write the idea off entirely, though, because the concept of fish sticks being frozen for later use is pretty good. They adapted it into a homemade recipe instead, and this was especially true for all the towns near coastal areas like in the Great Lakes. They had access to all kinds of fresh local fish. But what about the people who had lived their whole lives in landlocked areas with no sight of water? Well, they used canned or frozen fish, and they used it more sparingly than others, but they would still resort to making their own fish sticks at home. Buying entire fillets and cutting them up was a lot more cost-effective than buying the prepackaged thing. Also, If you were a Catholic and meatless Fridays were really a thing back in your home, this was a great alternative. Cold biscuit sandwiches with molasses or fatback were the kind of lunch that got a man through a 12-hour day with nothing but grit and habit to lean on. The biscuits were always cold by the time the tin lunch pail opened, but that did not matter much. If there was molasses in the pantry, you spread it thick for sweetness. If there was only fatback, you tucked in a slice or two for salt and smoke. The biscuits themselves were usually baked from leftover dough at dawn, made tough enough to hold together through a morning in a jacket pocket. By noon, the edges had gone soft, and the smell of lard or syrup made the whole meal feel like home. These sandwiches were a bridge between the breakfast table and the next hard stretch of fieldwork, something made from what little you had but worth every bite. Each one carried a taste of someone's kitchen, and even in its plainness, it was love in its simplest form, wrapped in wax paper and patience. Open-faced cheese melt sandwiches were one of the simplest yet most comforting lunches of the 1950s, made by placing a slice of white bread under a broiler with a slab of American cheese on top until it bubbled and browned. Housewives praised it for speed and thrift because it transformed the most basic pantry ingredients into something warm and satisfying without effort. Children loved how gooey the cheese became, pulling in stretchy strands with every bite, while parents enjoyed knowing it cost only a few cents. Sometimes a slice of tomato or a sprinkle of paprika was added, but most families were content with the plain version. This lunch was often paired with tomato soup or a small salad, rounding out a meal that felt complete even on the tightest budget. The open-faced cheese melt represented the era's new fascination with convenience cooking, where a few minutes under the broiler created a dish that felt far richer than it really was. In countless kitchens, the smell of melting cheese meant comfort was on the way. Canned corned beef hash transformed from breakfast fare into a satisfying lunch when seniors needed something hot and filling without elaborate preparation. The can contained pre-mixed corned beef and potatoes that fried up crispy in a skillet with minimal attention, creating a meal that tasted far more substantial than its modest cost suggested. For those living alone, one can provide enough hash for a generous serving with perhaps some left for tomorrow. The preparation required only opening the can, scooping contents into a hot skillet, and pressing down until a golden crust formed. Some added a fried egg on top, though many ate it plain with ketchup. The salty, meaty flavor satisfied cravings for something savory and warm, especially on cold days. Canned hash kept indefinitely in pantries, ready whenever the mood struck. At roughly 35 cents per can, it represented remarkable value for protein and carbohydrates. This humble canned product sustained generations who understood that convenience and economy could coexist. Scotch eggs are actually a funny one. You would most commonly associate them with pub culture in Britain, right? I mean, that's how most people think of them. That's their history too. People would get off work or get a lunch break and decide to hit the local pub with the lads for a few Scotch eggs. What really are they, though? A Scotch egg is just an egg packed with protein. It's a hard-boiled or soft-boiled egg that gets this blanket of seasoned sausage meat, and nestled inside that, it gets coated in breadcrumbs, upon which it gets deep-fried until it's completely golden brown. So, yeah, it's definitely one calorically dense egg, but that also makes it perfect for work because you can carry 2 or 3 of these and they fill you up right away. The crust is exactly as crispy as you're thinking it is, by the way, and I know you're getting ideas of how succulent this must be to bite into. Let me tell you, you're right on the money. The spiced pork on the inside is something divine, and the creamy egg center just brings everything together for the perfect flavor experience. The flavors also change depending on what spices you use and what herbs you pair it with, so you can really experiment a lot with this dish. Number 21. Welsh rarebit on toast. This was the elegant little luncheon plate that ladies ordered at the counter when they wanted something hot but not heavy. Something with a knife and fork and a cloth napkin instead of a paper one. Sharp cheddar grated by hand and melted slowly over low heat with half a bottle of ale, a spoon of Worcestershire sauce, a knife point of dry English mustard, and a single beaten egg yolk stirred in at the very last second to thicken the sauce. Poured thick over 2 triangles of buttered toast on a warm plate, sometimes with a slice of beefsteak tomato tucked underneath or a strip of crisp bacon laid across the top. Schrafft's served it through the late 60s. Horn and Hardart kept it on the automat menu until 1974. The dish disappeared because the word rarebit confused a generation of younger customers who looked at the menu board and thought the plate involved actual rabbit. Lunch counter managers stopped ordering the ingredients when the daily orders dropped below 10 plates, and the name itself never came back into circulation. Number 13, mashed potatoes with brown gravy. The potatoes came as dehydrated flakes in a 50-pound bag from the USDA commodity program, reconstituted with hot water, butter, and a splash of whole milk in a steam kettle. A wire whip on a long handle blended them in 3 minutes. The brown gravy came from a powdered base mixed with hot water in a smaller pot. A number 12 scoop dropped a perfect dome of potatoes on each tray like a small white hill, and a 4-ounce ladle covered it with gravy. The gravy ran down the slope and pooled in the corner of your compartment, and you would dip a tater tot in it before the corn even hit the tray. The 2012 standards did not pull mashed potatoes outright, but the powdered gravy disappeared because of the sodium count. The new gravy is thinner and tastes nothing like the version a 1986 kid remembers. Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Speedafests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. Tuna twist was this seasoning mix that General Foods came up with in the 1970s. Plain canned tuna on its own was an extremely boring and bland dish. I mean, to be fair, anything would get that way after literal years of eating it, especially after kids had to get so used to rationing and eating low-tier food like canned tuna every day for dinner. But that's why they had things like tuna twists, giving the old reliable a new kick that restored its spark in the eyes of the people. It came in packets that had flavors like onion or cheddar, and the cheddar one obviously did better. The catch is they tend to be mixed with tuna and mayo, which makes it a tuna salad, and they were actually really good for these quick and easy DIY sandwiches. They didn't even really need a lot of work to assemble, but if you were giving them as a lunchbox meal, you needed to be prepared for. Tuna twists didn't do that well with children because it just wasn't a taste that they were really familiar with, but parents are nothing if not crafty. They'd make sandwiches out of these and dress it up with some bacon or chips and barbecue sauce, and kids wouldn't even be able to tell the difference. So don't be fooled. These got more mileage than you'd think. Number 28. Cream-chipped beef on toast. Soldiers called it something unprintable during both World Wars, but the lunch counter version was a different animal entirely. Paper-thin slices of dried beef stirred into a thick white sauce made from butter, flour, and whole milk, poured over 2 slices of toast. Some counters used biscuits instead. It was salty, rich, and filling. Factory towns in Pennsylvania and Ohio kept this on the board well into the 1970s because the men coming off the night shift needed something heavy and fast. When the last Woolworth's lunch counters closed in 1997, creamed chipped beef lost its final home. Nobody mourned it publicly, but if you grew up eating it, you remember exactly how it tasted. Hot tomato soup with saltines represented perhaps the most iconic simple lunch for seniors living alone, combining warmth, flavor, and affordability in a single bowl. Campbell's condensed soup cost roughly 12 cents per can and stretched to serve one generously when mixed with water or milk. The soup heated quickly on the stovetop, filling the kitchen with familiar aromas that signaled lunchtime. Saltine crackers floated on top or accompanied the bowl, their salty crunch providing textural contrast to the smooth, tangy soup. For those eating alone, this lunch offered psychological comfort alongside physical nourishment since the warm bowl felt like care and attention. The soup's smooth texture went down easily for those with dental concerns. A sleeve of crackers lasted weeks, making them economical pantry staples. This pairing sustained generations of seniors through quiet lunchtimes, requiring minimal effort. Though soup cans remain on shelves, the ritual of crackers floating in tomato soup has largely faded from daily practice. Sugar bread was an inexpensive meal that a lot of poor Americans, especially children, ate when there was nothing else they had. It was something that was literally just as bare bones as you could imagine. Plain bread, sprinkled with only a modest amount of sugar, spread with butter and dipped in a little bit of milk. It was a way to stretch ingredients, but people tried their best to make it feel like it was a sweet treat regardless. Of course, it was hard to take it that way, but it really shows you how resilient people were and how ingenious their plans were when it came to rationing things out. Bread was really cheap and filling, and it was especially one of the best things people who were farmsteaders relied on. Plus, sugar was also just as important for people who lived in the city. It was a quick burst of energy that really set people right, and while it was not cheap, a small amount could do a lot for a plain slice of bread. Also, that crunch was just addictive. You didn't need to cook it, and it was a decent pick-me-up for what it was worth. Number 18. The corn dog on a stick. They came frozen, 80 to a case, the cornmeal batter already wrapped tight around a beef and pork frankfurter on a wooden skewer. The cafeteria oven baked them on parchment for 18 minutes. Then a kitchen worker tonged them onto trays 2 at a time. Mustard came in foil packets you tore open with your teeth. The wooden stick was the part most kids fought over after the dog was gone because you could prop it in a milk carton and pretend it was a flag. Corn Dog Day was usually a Wednesday on the 4-week rotation, paired with baked beans and a peach half. The cafeteria version was always oven-baked, like a leaner cousin to keep the saturated fat under the federal cap. By 2014, the breading tested above the new sodium limits. Most districts pulled it from your menu and never put it back. I grew up with a lot of Kraft. It was a cheap, affordable cereal brand that knew how to get the job done, and honestly, you can't ask for much more. One of their most prolific ones, I think, was Kugel in 1971. Despite it having a relatively short career to stuff like Frosties, the flavored peanut spread knew its market and it came at it viciously. It came in all kinds of flavors that were just aimed right at kids, and looking back, they had some pretty good aim. It was so hard to resist that banana and vanilla as a kid. I mean, a lot of parents, especially single ones, didn't always have the time to prepare a full-fledged lunchbox with different sections and assortments of food. Sometimes you just need something that gets the job done quick and gets it done right, and Kugel was perfect for that. Parents eventually became more aware about the nutritional value that their children were getting out of stuff like store-bought cereals and packaged food. But for the time it was there, it did pretty good. Honestly, I wouldn't mind having a bowl as an office lunch, even as an adult. So, making a lot of use out of the stuff you could grow easily was just the way people were living. You already know how convenient of a setup people had with cabbage, so the next stop was incorporating some awesome cabbage-based dishes into the weekly diet plan. Cabbage rolls stuffed with leftover rice were one of the best things to make because you could kill 3 birds with 1 stone. You were eating, for 1, and for 2, it was really healthy. Third of all, you would get to use any leftover rice and make sure absolutely nothing went to waste from your pantry. Sounds like someone being neurotic? Well, when the difference between being hungry is whether or not you manage a sack of rice properly, I think it's fairly justified. Now, I gotta say, people really weren't that open to cabbage yet. I mean, as a standalone item. They were used to having it as an embellishment in most dishes, but they didn't have anything that was cabbage-centric. The 1930s wasn't just a decade of struggle and resilience, it was also a decade of broadening horizons. People were acquiring tastes they never had thought they would ever enjoy. Cornmeal mush squares were proof that mountain folks could turn the simplest ingredients into comfort. Cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt were cooked into a thick porridge at night, poured into a pan, and left to cool until firm. By morning, it's sliced clean, ready to be fried in bacon grease until crisp and golden on the outside. The inside stayed soft and creamy, making it a meal that worked hot or cold, plain or with a drizzle of syrup. It was food that didn't spoil fast, didn't cost much, and didn't need anything fancy to taste right. Even when cupboards were bare, there was always cornmeal to rely on. Its smell filled the kitchen like a promise, warm and earthy, steady as the sunrise. Every bite carried the comfort of routine and the pride of making something from almost nothing. In the mountains, that was enough to keep spirits strong. Let's talk pork pies for a hot second. Basically, these were the original British meat snacks, and a lot of immigrants that first came on over to America popularized this dish as a working-class old reliable that you could whip up whenever you wanted. A classic pork pie is this round pastry jam-packed with ground pork, tucked into a firm and crumbly hot water crust. The top is usually sealed, and you have a layer of pork jelly poured in after baking, which sets as soon as the meat begins to cool. I know that might sound like a bit much, but it really does work. Also, the peppery seasonings aren't something you can miss here. They really make the dish stand out, and the cold, dense pork center contrasts amazingly well with the buttery crust. It's something that people preferred eating cold because that's when everything would truly set in and the jelly would be at its best, but you could have it hot too. Pork pies are genuinely a vintage recipe though, going back all the way to medieval England. They took off in the 16th century. They were a massive hit with fox hunters, and the only ones that could hunt those were upper-class dudes in red coats. Eventually, it became a no-nonsense meal that everybody knew about. Those were 100 lunch counter meals that once fed a whole generation and then quietly vanished from every menu in America. If one of these brought back a memory of a place you used to sit, a person who used to serve you, or a meal you have not tasted in decades, share that story in the comments. And if you want more meals like these, hit subscribe so you never miss a video.